Hey there kids, it's me, Mr. Creepypasta, and before we get started on tonight's story, I'm going to let you know about Cabinet of Fever Dreams. Cabinet of Fever Dreams is available now on Spotify. It's a new story podcast that is a collection of all stories from Mike Jesus Langer, the author of tonight's story. New episodes on Tuesday, Thursdays, and Sundays. You can find a link to them in the description down below. And now, on to tonight's story. The sign was an improvised marriage of laminated paper and flimsy wood. The plastic was worn at the edges, and the original yellow coloring of the paper had soaked away through untold seasons, but the message of the sign was clear. In bold, Comic Sans font, it read, "Do not feed the midnight clowns." The drive from Olymec to Prague took 3 hours on a good day, and 5 if the D1 was being its usual self. But I always made it without any stops. It was on that particular day, near the tail end of a Sunday afternoon ride, that I felt the need to pull over into the particular gas stations. I got a Red Bull and a baguette, and I sat down at the benches by the parking lot. Getting some caffeine in my system and food in my stomach had me feeling better, and I was still feeling just a bit too sleepy to get back behind the wheel. So, to wake myself up, I went for a bit of a walk around the lot. It was a big place, one of those spots where the long haulers with foreign plates sleep. I walked along the massive trucks carrying mysteries until I reached a slope of gravel. At the bottom of the rocks sat a meadow, and embedded in its unkempt grass, the sign read, "Do not feed the midnight clowns." The first time I had stopped at the gas station was purely by chance, but it quickly became tradition. I was making the drive from Prague to Olymec just about every Friday afternoon, and driving back just about every Sunday. Stopping by the sign became my little ritual at the end of the week. Once, on my third pilgrimage or so, I even ventured to ask the gas station attendant about the sign. They weren't helpful, or nice for that matter. The internet was of no help either. The message was there week after week, yet no new clues to its origin presented themselves. So, as the months dragged on, I just found myself content with the mystery of the sign, which read, "Do not feed the midnight clowns." I was seeing a girl in Olymec. At first, the obstacles of distance seemed completely absurd, but life works better when people are at arm's reach. I thought she'd eventually move to the bigger city, but she liked it back home. She wanted to stay. She worked at a theater and loved the old building in a way that I couldn't comprehend. As we argued more and more about the theater and our diverting future, we started to see each other less. After a couple of missed visits, we texted each other goodbye. Maybe I was just busy with work, or maybe I was too heartbroken to care. But when I stopped going to Olymec, I stopped thinking about the sign. For 3 weeks, I sulked and worked and slept and drank, and then, on a Friday, just as I was getting ready to spend the evening alone, she showed up at my door. A welcome surprise. We had a splendid weekend and parted on good, yet vague terms. Through chat boxes across the week, all seemed fine. We spoke as if the past month apart had been a collective hallucination. When I showed up at her place on Friday, however, time came crashing down on us. She seemed happy to see me at first, but 5 days had passed and they made all the difference. Things got sad. Last week's visit might have been a mistake, but this one definitely was. We sat down at our favorite pub, each nursing a solitary beer as we tried to make sense of the future. When the pauses in conversation got too long to bear, I decided it would be best for me to go back home. I'd scarcely sipped from my beer, but it was already dark. There could be plenty of dangers lurking in the darkness of the D1 highway. She insisted I stay, even if only on the couch. I couldn't. There were 2 stops I took on my drive back home. The first, not far from Olympic, was at a roadside McDonald's. My nerves kept me from eating the whole day, and as I sat in the parking lot by the Golden Arches, they kept me unhungry still. I took a couple tasteless bites of my burger before I got back on the road. In the darkness and silence, I drove back home, resolved to stop at a familiar parking lot with a makeshift sign. No truckers slept that night. The parking lot, much like the gas station, was empty. I didn't mind the solitude, though. Parking back in my usual spot after a month-long break brought up plenty of feelings. And on the back of those feelings, my hunger returned. I ate my now cold McDonald's with only flashes of the headlights from the highway for company. I got through the burger, but by the time I ate my first nugget, I was wiping my fingers and checking my phone. She hadn't called. And she hadn't written. It was just a couple minutes after midnight. Did I notice the bobbing red lights on the far side of the parking lot? At first, I thought it was just the reflections of the passing cars, yet even when the road was empty, the small blip of red continued to hover in the darkness. For a while, I sat there trying to uncover the mystery of the light from the comfort of my own car. I ate my cold McNuggets and watched. Finally, when only stale fries and a paper bag remained, I got out of the car. The walk to the edge of the parking lot wasn't far, yet the closer I got, the more my steps slowed. At first, the bobbing red light was just that, a featureless glow in the darkness. The closer I got, however, the more my steps started to slow. The red light was starting to resemble the nose of a clown. I never took the concept of the midnight clowns seriously. I mean, I always considered the sign in the meadow to be the result of some inside joke or quirky artistry. Looking at that bobbing red light, however, had me questioning my skepticism. A flash of light from a passing car dispelled any doubt. I saw him only for a second, but the afterburn of the bizarre image lingered in the darkness. The red light was a glowing clown nose attached to a pale face with frizzled hair. In the darkness, there was a clown, and he was balancing on stilts. The sight made me doubt my sanity, and I was uncomfortable enough to consider retreating to my car. But just as I was about to turn around and run, I heard the queerest of sounds. I mean, I lack the words to fully describe it, but it was like a mixture of whistling and children's laughter, a strange song which lacked any melody or tempo. It was coming ever so faintly from the far side of the parking lot. The clown on the stilts had made me beyond uncomfortable, but there was something about that queer song that filled my heart with calm. And perhaps it was just out of curiosity, or perhaps it was the thought of going back home to my empty apartment that made me sick. I decided to investigate the strange music. The sign had not changed, yet it no longer seemed absurd. At the bottom of the slope of gravel, all around the lowly meadow, frolicked the midnight clowns. There were about a dozen of them, all different shapes and sizes, all dancing and twirling and enjoying the night. Their eyes shone with a calm pale blue, and their noses, much like the one of the stilt walker, lit up in bright blood red. I stood not far from the clowns in plain sight, yet none of them acknowledged me. Their song, although unconventional in its composition, seemed friendly, and the way they danced and rolled around the meadow didn't make the clowns seem dangerous, but I knew better than to spend my evenings with strangers in unlit wilderness, making as little noise as I could. I retreated back into my car. The absurdity of what I had seen, although seemingly harmless, had become far too much to handle on my own. The moment I got back in my car, almost by instinct, I called her. I told her about the sign and the clowns, but even in the moment, the wild strangers in the meadow seemed less pressing than our relationship. We talked. We talked for a long time, and as we talked, I fished out my stale French fries from the McDonald's bag and picked away at them and the words I wanted to say got stuck in my throat. We talked, and as we talked, my attention drifted from the bobbing red lights in the distance. It wasn't until we said our final goodbyes and hung up that I noticed that the sole clown nose was no longer alone. Like bloody fireflies, the crowd of clowns approached my car from the far side of the parking lot. They hopped and danced and did cartwheels in my directions, all while producing the eerie notes of that strange song. They moved quick, and by the time I got the motor running, the clowns had surrounded my car. With long, thin fingers, they pressed against my window, and with shining, starving eyes, they looked at my half-empty pack of French fries. The midnight clowns were discomforting from the very start, but it wasn't until they had their faces pressed against the windshield of my car that I felt true terror. They had the faces of children. Even though some of them had scraggly beards and most seemed to possess the bodies of full-grown adults, all the clowns had the innocent faces of children. Their teeth, however, exuded a wholly different mood. Like thin, writhing tentacles, they moved around their small mouths. The longer the strange creatures looked at my pack of French fries, the more bits of glowing red spittle slid down their childish chins. The midnight clowns watched my food, and with their strange, writhing dentures, they licked at their thin lips. Before the creatures could fully surround my car, I got in reverse and hightailed as far away from the parking lot as I could. As hungry as the clowns were, and as quickly as they moved before, they did not make chase. For a couple panicked moments, I could see the stilt-walking clown in my rearview mirror, but even he soon disappeared. I got away safely. And when I was still in that parking lot, a strange thought swirled through my mind. I considered, very briefly, feeding the midnight clowns. They did, after all, look very hungry, and there was something about that strange music that escaped their lips that had me feeling charitable about my cold McDonald's. I don't know if the idea to feed the clowns came out of my very own will, or whether they had somehow forced the thought into my skull through their queer dances and music. Regardless of how the idea of sharing my food grasped my consciousness, however, I rejected it. I rejected it because I remembered the sign. I remembered the makeshift sign in an inconspicuous meadow that provided a single line of advice. I remembered the sign that read, ever so clearly, "Do not feed the midnight clowns." They pulled him from the lake, and they say his skin was as blue as the ice on the lake. They checked his pulse and found him stone cold dead. They loaded him into a wagon and took him into town, the body bouncing like a stone as they rode. Whenever it was that the bumping stopped, none of them knew. But when they arrived in town, they found the back of the wagon. He had our full attention as the tale found its crescendo. They had lost the body somewhere, and when they told the sheriff, he made them go back the way they had come to look for it. No matter how much they looked, or how far they went, they couldn't find the frozen body, and wouldn't until morning. The sound of a chip crunching against John's teeth sounded very loud in the space, but we all pushed it out of our minds as we listened. The sound of screams would wake the town as Judge Weller awoke to find the frozen body of his latest victim beside him in his bed, and when the police arrived, he gladly confessed to his crimes. Gabriel gasped when the final blow fell, but we shushed him as we listened. He thought of nothing else for the length of his stay in the county jail. Likely thought of nothing else right up until the rope ended his life. But the stiff, frozen body of Taylor Williams that had found its warmth into his bed. We all sat back, sighing contentedly as we softly clapped. "It's a good one, Craig," I said, nodding appreciatively as the others congratulated him. It was Halloween, And as it was Craig's turn to host the Halloween sleepover, he had been able to tell the first story. One of many I was sure would be shared that night. Craig, Gabriel, John, and I had been friends since kindergarten. Our town wasn't very large, maybe 25,000 people tops, and when we realized we only lived a few streets away from each other, it was a done deal that we would be friends for life. We spent our days riding bikes or playing video games or just enjoying each other's company, and we didn't see an end to those days anytime soon. As we got older, however, Craig and I developed what you might call a bit of a rivalry. Whenever it was video games, Pokemon cards, bike races, or whatever we did, the two of us had to be the best in our friend group. We'd do anything for each other, but it was accepted that our competitions often put us at odds. I was often the one to come out on top in these contests, and as such, Craig had begun to take them kind of seriously. Any opportunity to be the winner was a chance that he took, so when he looked at me to follow his story with something better, I was already waiting. Well, this one is one my dad told me about, and it gave me chills. So they say the guy who walks around Carter May Park after dark, he wears a hooded sweatshirt, and no one's seen his face, and lived to describe it. He told me that everyone called the guy Mr. Toothman, and he was a local legend of sorts. Lots of people had seen him, but no one had ever gotten close enough to talk to him or see his face. Craig pretended to yawn, but the others were enthralled. Gabriel was lying on his stomach, his eyes getting big as he balanced on his hand, and John was nodding his head as he sat with his mouth a little open. I could see the Jolly Rancher he'd been about to cradle in his cheek as it threatened to slip out, but he seemed not to realize he was about to lose some of his hard-won candy to the carpet. Well, my dad and his friends decided that they wanted to be the first to see what this elusive Mr. Toothsome looked like, so they went to the park after dark and they camped out near a spot that he said to stop at. Someone at school had told him that Mr. Toothman would stop and feed the birds just after sunset by the little fountain. And as they hid in the bush and waited for sunset, they all told stories of what he might look like. "I bet he looks like a bat with long, pointy teeth and drool coming out of his mouth," said Dad's friend Randy. Craig rolled his eyes, but he was clearly as interested as the rest of my friends. None of them had heard the story before. None of them had any idea of a legendary creature that stalked the park. They had never heard of it because I'd never told it. It was something I'd been saving for tonight. "I bet he looks like an alligator, and his face barely fits beneath the hood," said Teddy. But Dad didn't speculate with them. He just kept watching the bench. It got darker and darker, the bugs tuning up as the crickets and the night birds began their song. He was supposed to show up right after dusk. They'd been told so, and they believed it. But he still wasn't there. And the mosquitoes were beginning to bite. A dog barked outside, but none of them took notice. They were all too enthralled by the story to give it a thought. "I bet he looks like a monster from under the bed," Teddy said. "And when he gets you, he drags you into the dark and swallows you whole." "I bet," said a deep, cold voice, "that he gobbles up naughty children who are out past their bedtimes." They turned. And there he was. His hood was down, but Dad said that he could see his face in the gloom. All three went tearing off as fast as they could, the Tooth Man right behind them. They ran for home as fast as they were able, his running steps behind him. Dad said that he was making a weird sucking sound like he was trying to stop from drooling at the sight of such tasty flesh. They ran and they ran, but when they got to Teddy's house, which was closer, they discovered that he wasn't with them. Gabriel gasped, but it was pretty expected. They told his parents that the Tooth Man had gotten him, but they never really believed them. The police were called, and when the boys told them that Tooth Man had gotten Teddy, they didn't believe them either. The park was searched, but nothing was ever found. Teddy remains missing to this day, and you could still see the Tooth Man walking around the park sometimes. They say that he still sits on the bench, feeding the night birds, watching for his next victim to come wandering by. As I finished, the others clapped softly, telling me that it really had been a great story. All but Craig, of course. Yeah, it was okay. Kind of unbelievable, despite your best efforts, though. Oh, it's real, I shot back, as I grabbed some candy from my nearby bag. My dad said that he was there. His friend Teddy was never seen again, and his other friend Randy moved away a few months later. His parents were afraid that he might go missing too. Sold their house, and got out of town. Craig made a disbelieving noise. Oh, come on. Like anyone would buy that. You made it all up, just admit it. I glowered at him. My candy still half unrolled. Are you calling my dad a liar? Because he wouldn't lie to me about something like that. All right then, Craig said, grinning. Prove it. I looked at him skeptically. How? Let's go to the Carter May Park right now. It's right down the street from here, like a 10-minute walk. It's already 9 o'clock, so this tooth man should be there. We could see him and get home before my mom wakes up and comes to check on us. I started to decline, but why shouldn't we go? Never mind that we were 4 12-year-olds who were talking about going out well after dark. Never mind that we were children who were talking about going to find a creature that snatches children. It was Halloween. And tonight, anything was possible. Why couldn't we go to the park and catch a glimpse of a real-life monster? Tonight was the night for seeing monsters, wasn't it? All right, Craig. He started to look a little skeptical, but then I crossed my arms and delivered the final blow. Come on. You aren't chicken, are you? And that sealed it. And about 5 minutes later, we were slipping out of his garage and making our way down the sidewalk. The streets were empty. The kids inside asleep or counting their candies, and we had the world to ourselves, it seemed. The odd car rolled by to break that illusion now and then, but our only company on the walk was the scuttle of trash or the flap of a bat in slight wind. It was quiet. The night just beginning to stretch its fingers across the town, and as the moon hung high over the top of us, it seemed that anything really could be possible. The park was lit by intermittent light poles, and the islands of light were welcome reprieves in the murky blackness. We could see the hay sculptures that the town had erected in the park, remnants of its Halloween event earlier that week, and they seemed monstrous in the quiet night. The playground was still covered in the thick, fake spider webs that the town had put there, and it all seemed very spooky to 4 kids out past curfew. We heard the fountain before we came upon it. It was sitting at an intersection of 3 light poles, and they cast an eerie light across the ever-lapping surface of the water. Coins gleamed within the belly of that fountain. We had all glimpsed them greedily from time to time, and as we got closer, we stopped at the sight of someone sitting on the edge of the fountain. He was hunched over, his chin against the back of his hand, and we crouched down as we tried to hide from him. My heart beat a little faster as my eyes bore into him. Was this the tooth man my father had told us about? No way, Gabriel breathed, slouched behind a shrub as we watched the man on the edge of the fountain. Guess you weren't making it up. I told you my dad wasn't a liar, I said. We stood there watching for a few minutes, the fountain the only noise to be heard, before Craig said, Well, let's go see what he looks like then. I blinked. What? Go see what he looks like. You know, if he's a monster, then we'll be the first ones to see his face. John and Gabriel nodded, liking the sound of this. Yeah, John chimed in. Otherwise, how do we know it's not just a homeless guy or something? You ever seen a homeless guy around here? I shot back. But Craig wouldn't be discouraged. Go over there and get a look, or I refuse to believe it's him. I tried to reason with him, but in the end, they wouldn't be swayed. So I started out from the shrub we had crouched behind, as slowly and quietly as I could. There was really no way to sneak up on him. The walkways and the straight shot to the fountain, and the figure was sitting on the rim of said fountain. He was going to see me no matter how I approached, so I just figured I'd move straight towards him. If it was the Tooth Man, I'd have plenty of chances to see him and run. If it wasn't, then they would let me know, and I could feel silly about creeping up on someone in the middle of the night. The closer I got, however, the more my hackles went up. The guy wasn't moving. He wasn't even breathing. And the closer I got, the more the tension rose. I began to expect him to spring up and grab me, to leap up and run at me, and as 20 feet became 10 feet, I could hear my teeth chattering. He just sat there, just leaned against his hand, and I wondered if he was trying to lure me in. I could see his hoodie now, the black fabric covering his face, and I just knew that beneath it, it would be rows of teeth or a slobbering mouth. Bug eyes. Or... Hello? Are you okay? I asked, reaching out to touch his arm. I expected to be grabbed. I expected to be devoured. I didn't expect him to fall backwards into the fountain with a loud splash. As straw rose around his still unmoving form, I began to understand. As my friends ran up asking what had happened, I realized it had been a scarecrow the whole time. In fact, I could see a second one sitting on the other side of the fountain. My friends laughed as they saw it too, and we all felt silly about being scared of a dumb old scarecrow. Craig was laughing, the tension gone, and I remember thinking how nice it was to see him just enjoying being my friend again. No rivalry, no challenge, just playing like we used to. When I saw something over his shoulder, I felt some of the mirth run out of me. Sitting on the bench across from the fountain, about 10 feet from our little group, was another figure, sitting on a park bench. There was a bag in his hands, popcorn or seeds, and it appeared to be feeding the birds. It wasn't moving. Didn't even appear to be breathing, and it too was dressed in a black hoodie and ratty jeans. The shadowy hood was facing towards us, and the depths were dark enough that I couldn't make out anything within. Craig seemed to grasp that I was looking past him, and when he turned around, I heard him chuckle. Man, these things are everywhere. They probably won't mind if we push them over, right? They're just hay. They're probably just going to throw them out. I wanted to stop him as he walked towards it, but John and Gabriel were already going to shove the other scarecrows in as it sat on the other side of the fountain. They thought I had done it on purpose, thought I had realized it wasn't real as I came up, and they wanted some Halloween mischief too. I mean, the tension was gone. It was all fun and games again, and I was the only one to see Craig as he approached the bench. They look so real, I heard him half whisper. I could almost believe it was. The thing reached up and grabbed him just as the other scarecrow went into the fountain, and his screams of panic were lost amidst the splash. The hand holding the bag let it drop to the ground, and as Craig tried to pull away, I saw it rise slowly towards the hood. My other friends hadn't noticed yet. They were still too busy with the scarecrow they had pushed into the fountain, and as much as I wanted to move, my feet were frozen to the sidewalk. Craig was begging for help, screaming for his mother, and as the hood came down, I joined my scream of terror to his. They had named him aptly. His head was bald and pink, like the blobfish we had made fun of in science class the year before. His nose was thick and squashy, and his eyes were like little pits in his oddly shaped face. His mouth took up the majority of that face, and it was horrible enough to make up for the rest. His teeth were like sewing needles, a double row of sharp, steely gray fangs, and when he opened his jaws, it looked like he could swallow Craig whole. Craig stopped screaming when that mouth fell over his face, and that was when John and Gabriel figured out that something else was going on. We ran like frightened rabbits, our minds commanding us to get as far from that danger as we could. And I'm ashamed to say that we left Craig there. I mean, there was nothing we could do for him. Craig's mom answered the door after about 5 minutes of pounding and screaming, and she came fully awake when we started trying to tell her what had happened. The cops came in a hurry when she called them, and we took them to the spot where he had been attacked. There was no sign of him, or the man. But there was enough blood to prove that something had happened there. It stained the pavement, the bench. The city would spend days afterward trying to get it off. We were all taken to the station so we could give our statement, and when I told them that my dad told me about that story, about the Tooth Man, they brought him in too. Dad was still in his pajamas, pale, scared, unsure of what was going on, and he hugged me when he saw me. He and my mom had been in the lobby of the police station for a while, and they told them very little about what had happened. They were worried that I'd been hurt or even killed. Seeing me sent relief washing through him. The relief was smothered when I told him that we had seen the Tooth Man. What? The Tooth Man, I reiterated. The one from your story, the one who took Teddy, remember? Dad looked confused. That's impossible, kiddo. No, I said. We saw him. He had the black hoodie that covers his face. He was on the bench beside the fountain. Craig thought that he saw a scarecrow and he went to go push him over. That's when it got him. It's a Tooth Man. You told me about him. You said... It was a story, buddy, he said, looking at the police as if begging them to believe him. I made it up. I never had a friend go missing. I just made up a scary story to tell you. There's no such thing as the Tooth Man. The police let us go not long after. But I think about that Halloween a lot, especially at this time of year. Turns out that Craig had been right all along. And my dad had been a liar. My dad had made up a story I told my friends, and if I hadn't told it, we never would have been in that park that night. No one knows who or what took Craig, but like the Randy from his story, his family moved away not long after. Other people have reported seeing a man in a black hoodie in the park at night, but the police have never been able to substantiate it. The park mostly stays empty now, and the people who use it are the kind who don't like to be disturbed. I mean, it's not a park you take your kids to anymore. And the town built a shiny new park not long after the incident. So if you see a man in a black hooded sweatshirt, steer clear of him. You never know when you might find yourself staring into the toothy maw of the Tooth Man. I grew up in the kind of Rust Belt town where the cleanest, safest place for kids to play was the local sewer canal. My friends Brett, Holly, Eli, and I met there almost every day during summer vacation. The overhanging trees, they gave us shade and hid us from the adults. It was like our own secret hangout spot. The only problem was the concrete tunnel at the end of it. Something about that tunnel made me think of a round, toothless stone mouth. Freakishly oversized insects that we'd never seen before buzzed in the humid breeze that blew out of that darkness. And it wasn't long before we started daring each other to crawl inside. Eli was the first to stick his head in, but he didn't dare go any further. Holly, though, did. She snorted, called us all scaredy cats, and crawled into the tunnel until only her tiny white shoe still hung outside of it. And then she screamed. The kind of 100-decibel shriek that only preteen girls are capable of. We grabbed her leg and yanked her out. She wouldn't stop scratching at her head. According to Holly, a spider as big as her hand had scurried through her hair. Yeah, we avoided the tunnel for a long time after that. Until the day that I lost Eli's basketball. I mean, it wasn't technically Eli's. It belonged to his older brother, Dwayne, a muscular 13-year-old, and we all lived in terror of him. I mean, in fact, the ball was Dwayne's most prized possession. Eli had only taken it to brag about the famous signature that covered it. But like the dumb kids we were, we couldn't resist throwing it around. I faked a pass to Brett, but tossed it to Eli instead. I didn't realize he was standing in front of the tunnel. Dwayne's prized ball slipped right through Eli's fingers and disappeared into the darkness. One look at Eli's terrified face was all I needed to imagine the beating that Dwayne would give us. No one was saying it, but I knew what I had to do. I took a deep breath, got down on my hands and knees, and crawled into the tunnel. The legs of a flying insect brushed against my ear, trying to climb inside. I cried out, smacked the side of my head, and nearly slipped in the slime beneath my legs. Something more than the bugs and muck was bothering me. And the tunnel was flat. How could the ball have rolled so far? Unless something had carried it. My friends were cheering me on, but their voices sounded very far away. I shuddered and kept moving. After what felt like forever, I saw lights up ahead. It streamed down through a grate overhead into a small concrete chamber. Dwayne's basketball rolled through it and into the gloom beyond. I had just stepped into the light when I heard it bounce. Looking for this? A voice asked from the shadows. Every instinct told me to scream and run, but I didn't. Who's there? I asked. Do you want your ball back? The voice teased. Or not? I couldn't tell if the speaker was male or female, old or young. The darkness hid them completely. Of course I do, I huffed. Then how about a trade? You get what you want, and I get something of yours. Like what? Bounce. Bounce. I'll tell you when the time is right. Not now. It was only a basketball, I told myself. I mean, how big of a trade could it be? Okay, fine. Give me the ball. Just like that, my trade came bouncing out of the shadows. It's been a pleasure. If you'd ever like to trade for anything else, you know where to find me. I gulped and backed away, my throat dry. I didn't want to turn my back to whatever was lurking in the shadows, but I didn't have a choice. I looked up and turned around. Two backlit, child-sized figures were staring down into the grate. I scrambled out of the horrible tunnel as quickly as I could. You found it! Eli's cheer died in his throat when he saw my face. What's wrong? I opened my mouth, ready to tell him everything. Nothing, I found myself saying. Where's Brett and Holly? They climbed up on top of the grate to spy on you. Eli frowned. Are you sure you're okay? Never better. I forced myself to smile, wondering why I couldn't bring myself to talk about what I'd found. How about a trade? You get something of mine, and I get something of yours. Laying in bed that night, I turned those words over and over in my head as I listened to the windstorm outside. What kind of deal had I just made? When would the thing from the sewer be coming to collect? Branches scraped against the house like sharpened claws, and it was a long time before I was able to fall asleep. I woke to golden sunlight streaming through the bedroom window. I could hear my family arguing and laughing in the kitchen. The warm, buttery smell of Father's pancakes drifted up the stairs. Maybe things would be okay after all. Or so I thought. But something had changed between my friends and I. When we met back at the sewer the next day, Brett and Holly seemed tense, anxious even, like they were waiting for Eli and I to leave. We parted ways after barely an hour had just passed. The whole experience left me with a sick sense of foreboding, although I wasn't sure why. And the next day, when we met again, I understood. Brett was hunched over in concentration, driving a brand new remote-controlled truck. It was a toy that his family could never have afforded, yet here it was, zooming up and down the slopes of the canal. Holly watched, stuffing her fist into a bag of enormous Mars bars, the kind that were only available around Halloween. Her parents had put her on a strict diet. So I thought. So where did the candy bars come from? I looked nervously at the black tunnel ahead. Hey guys, I smiled nervously. Where'd you get that stuff? Nowhere, Brett and Holly responded in unison. Their flat tone reminded me of my own voice when I tried to describe the bargain I'd made. As it turned out, the remote-controlled truck and bag of candy were only the beginning. Each time Eli and I showed up to the sewer canal, Brett and Holly had more stuff. A Barbie mansion, the board game Candyland, even light-up sneakers. It was so unnerving that Eli and I just stopped going down to play by the sewer canal. We were afraid of what we might find. Soon enough, we weren't the only ones. There was something ominous about the way the phone rang that night. And the fear in my mother's eyes when she handed it to me. "It's your friend Holly," my mother whispered. "She sounds upset. I think her cat's missing. Have you seen it?" I could barely hear my mother's whispers over Holly's sobs. "Ariel's gone and she's never coming back," my friend was wailing. She named her cat after the Little Mermaid because she loved water. The name usually made me laugh, but not that night. "I can help you look for her," I stammered. "No, you can't," Holly moaned. "I found her collar by the sewer. She's gone." Another wail. My mother took away the phone, and I was left full of doubts. I mean, what had Ariel been doing down there? The next day, Holly walked sheepishly over to the abandoned lot where Eli and I were kicking a soccer ball into a trash can. "Can I play with you guys?" "What's wrong?" Eli sneered. "All out of other toys?" The can boomed as he scored a goal. "I'm not going down there anymore," Holly muttered. "First, it was just my stuff that went missing, like my swimsuit, my house keys, but now that Ariel's gone..." Holly couldn't say it, but I knew what she meant. She was scared of what might disappear next. For a long time, however, it seemed like nothing did. Brett, Holly, Eli, and I, we grew up. I forgot about dark sewer canals and abandoned lots, and instead spent more and more time inside on my computer. Eli went from a scrawny, scared kid to the star of our high school soccer team. Holly grew into a clever, beautiful bookworm. Writing fantasy stories and fan fictions was her way of dealing with the terrible secret that we all shared. Brett never left that secret behind. Of the four of us, he was the only one who continued to visit the sewer canal on a regular basis. As a result, he seemed to get everything he wanted. But he lost his friends. I mean, by our freshman year, Brett was looking at Holly in a strange way. It had been years since we'd last spoken, but he finally built up the courage to cross the lunchroom and talk to her. "Holly," he stammered. "I know we haven't hung out in a while, but I really like you, and I thought that maybe..." Brett trailed off. A hush fell over the table as we stared at the floor, our lunch trays, anywhere but our old friend. "I don't think it would work out, Brett," Holly finally answered. "I'm sorry." Brett turned crimson, clenched his fists, and stormed off. After school, I knew exactly where he was going. By the time I caught up with Brett, he had already reached the sewer canal. Brett, I know you think this will fix things, but you've got to listen to me. It won't." My old friend looked over his shoulder at me, shook his head, and crawled inside. I stepped forward to follow him, but the moment I looked into the tunnel, I was 9 years old again, swatting away freakish bugs, dragging my knees through the slime, listening to that horrible voice. Bounce. No, I couldn't force myself to go in there a second time. And by the time Brett crawled out, it would be too late. I stuffed my hands into my pockets and trudged home in the autumn twilight, feeling much older than I ever had before. I woke to a dark room and the echo of a ringing phone. I looked at the clock. 4:04 a.m. Full of foreboding. I sprinted to the kitchen and answered it before my family could wake up. "Oh, God," Brett whispered. "This wasn't what I wanted. It wasn't me. You gotta believe me. It wasn't me." The boom of a door flying open, a scream. The line went dead. I knew it had happened long before the trial. The news coverage, or the assembly the principal had held about the terrible tragedy in our midst. And when Brett claimed he hadn't been the one to slit Holly's throat and place her naked corpse in his bed that night, I was the only one who believed him. Years have passed since I chased Eli's basketball down that dark tunnel, but I still hear its bounce in my dreams. I try to tell myself that the voice in the sewers has already taken what it wanted from me, or that it might even have forgotten about me. But I know I'm wrong. How will I know when I've made my trade? When I try to stop my car and find my brake line missing? When I check my 2-year-old son's crib and I find it empty? Or will it be when I wake up in that lightless concrete tube, naked and helpless, with that horrible voice whispering in my ear, "Now I've got something of yours. Something I've been wanting for a long time." It was a hike that we would never forget, though we wished we would. My girlfriend and I were hiking in a familiar spot, just like we had done 1,000 times before. The hike was going to be different, though. We'd hike 3 miles in and camp for the night, wake up at 5 a.m., hike up to Helen's Overlook about 10 minutes from our camping spot, where we'd watch the sunrise. While she watched, I'd take a knee, I'd pull out a ring that I had bought weeks ago, and I would ask her to marry me. It was all so meticulously planned, but I hadn't taken something into account, something no one could have ever planned for. We parked in a lot at the base of the trail. I had hiked this trail and camped in these woods for years, and it seemed like a great place to bring my girlfriend after we got together. We had been for the last 3 years, but it had been about 8 months since we'd last been up here. We'd meant to go at the start of the spring, the changing seasons being our favorite time to be outdoors, but life had made it difficult. We were excited to get back up here after a long hiatus. We grabbed our packs and headed into the woods, following the trail that would take us to the spot where we meant to camp. Now, technically, the Park Service frowns on people camping near the state trails. That being said, the spot where we meant to camp was off the trail and into the woods a bit. A ranger could still wander up and tell us to leave, but sort of doubt it. I had only been able to leave once the whole time that I had been camping here, and that was on an occasion where my brother and I had built our fire too high. We were smarter now. We hadn't been discovered since then. "Sure is pretty," my girlfriend said, adjusting the straps on her pack as she walked. "Yeah," I agreed, looking at her more than ever. I slid my finger over the velvety top of the ring box as we walked. Couldn't wait to give it to her, see her surprise as I hit one knee, and see her tearful delight as she accepted. It never crossed my mind that she wouldn't. We'd get married in the spring next year and come out here camping for our honeymoon. As well, we so could visit the spot again. Sometimes, however, God loves to laugh at our plans. It started with the spiders. More specifically, it started with me running face first into a spider web. It had been hung across the trail, and the little builders fled as I slept at the remains that clung to my face. I checked myself to make sure that it hadn't fallen onto me, and when I was certain it was gone, I shivered and set off again. From there, my girlfriend and I found ourselves dodging webs pretty often, were just little spiders for the most part. And as they clustered together, the webs became more annoying. My girlfriend shrieked as one clung to her hair, and as I helped her check for stowaways, I couldn't help but feel crawly. I'd seen spiders in the woods before. They lived here too, but never like this. I had experienced that some of the late season snows would have gotten them, but here they were despite it all. We followed the trail, dodging spiders and looking for landmarks until my girlfriend finally said that she had to pee. "I want to walk over this way. Keep an eye out for other hikers." I told her I would. She stepped off into the woods to do her business. When she screamed a few minutes later, I ran into the woods, expecting to find a bear or a coyote or something. Instead, I found my girlfriend leaning against a tree, shaking, as she pointed to something strange hanging from a tree. It looked like a cocoon, but it was practically throbbing with spiders. I had once seen a wasp nest hanging in the woods, the big, papery-looking ones. That was what this looked like, more than anything. It was hanging from a nearby tree from thick strands of silk. I could see something rougher wrapped around the limb, too. The spiders were scuttling all over it. It was a little sickening to watch. I'm incapable of doing it justice, but there were more spiders on this cocoon or egg sac or whatever it was I had ever seen. They had spun webs all over trees and canopy, and they just kept spinning as they attempted to encase the little clearing in silk. This was their sanctuary, and they meant to keep it safe from people like us. "What the hell is that?" my girlfriend whispered. "What the hell is that thing?" I didn't know, and I told her as much. As little as I wanted to get closer to it, I couldn't help but slink closer as my curiosity cried out for a better look. The closer I got, the less it looked like a wasp nest, and the more it looked like cotton candy. I know what it sounds like, but it was almost translucent as I stared. I could see something inside it. It was non-indistinct, like something seen through a dirty window, but there was definitely something inside of that webby bundle. I had to stop myself from sticking my hand out to touch it, and that was when I saw something else that drew my attention. I would have completely missed it if I hadn't gotten so close, but now I could see the corner of something purple. It was underneath the spider cocoon. In a few more months, I would have seen the bundle get big enough to cover it too, as it came to the ground. Something translucent was over it, and I looked at the bottom of the mass as I reached out a shaky hand to grab for the thing. "What are you doing?" my girlfriend asked breathlessly. But I ignored her. My hand came shakily into contact with the thing, and it was a plastic Ziploc bag. As I lifted it, however, the back of my hand brushed against something on the bottom of the cocoon. I grimaced as something wet slid down my hand, and as I saw something black and stiff fall into the leaves, I gasped and backpedaled towards my girlfriend. As the sun shone behind the thing, I finally got a good look at what lay inside. And my suspicions were confirmed. "We have to go," I said, helping her up. We have to go call the ranger service right now." "What's going on?" she asked. But I didn't want to tell her until I was sure. We went back to the car and called the rangers, and in the meantime, I looked in the bag that I'd been clutching the whole way down the trail. It was a purple notebook, the kind that you get at the Dollar General for a couple of bucks, and inside was someone's journal. Her name must have been Lisa, because she signed all of her entries with it. The more I read, the more I came to understand that this was a journal she was keeping in a mental health facility after a suicide attempt. She talked about the medication that they gave her, about the groups she attended, about the phone calls with her parents that she had, and how it all helped her see that life had meaning and that she shouldn't squander it. She left the group home with a new lease on life, but that lease had soon run out. The last entry was made about 4 months ago, about a week before one of the worst spring storms in decades. "I just can't take it. Charlie is gone. He says he can't handle my roller coaster emotions. And he took Sophie to stay with his parents for a while. My parents are trying to be supportive, but I can see what a burden I've become to them. my husband and my daughter, so I've decided to leave. I'm going to hike the trails that gave me joy, and when I find a spot that I'm not likely to be found, I'll end it. If anyone finds this, my name is Lisa Turner. I closed it as a Jeep pulled into the parking lot and put it back in the bag. The Rangers were a couple of younger guys, college age, still green. They told us to lead the way, and we took them up to see what we had found. They laughed as we tried to explain to them what we found, joking that it was probably just a really big wasp nest. They shut up when we got to the spot, and they saw it for themselves. They called a few other people, telling us to stay close just in case. They brought a fogger and some thick suits for dealing with pests, as the spiders either fled or fell from the perch when the chemicals hit them. One of the Rangers brought a ladder and started inspecting the web mass. He was an older guy and looked like he'd been doing this since pioneer times. He shook his head and asked for the limb cutter. One of the younger guys scoffed. "There's no way you can cut that limb with these, Hawk." "Don't need it," said the older Ranger. I suppose it was Hawk. He told everyone to stand back and snipped something at the top. The whole thing came down, and when it burst, I saw what I feared inside. There was a woman in the cocoon. Her body bloated and rotten looking. She was covered in moving tumors that had burst and began spilling small spiders out of her. She had a rope around her neck, the purple mark still visible on the bloated skin. Her face looked peaceful despite the bulges and tumors where spiders had used her as an incubator. The police were called, and they handed them the journal and told them how we'd found the body. They thanked us, the Rangers telling us that they would put our names in for accommodation. It was the old guy I was waiting for. It looked like he wanted to talk to us since he cut the body down. And when he leaned in close so the others couldn't hear, I knew he meant to impart some wisdom. These boys haven't seen this kind of thing before, but it's not my first time. I found a hiker 2 years in and been used as a nest by ground wasps. Found a corpse savaged by bears, bones built into beaver dam. Hikers skewered on the new horns of spotted bugs. Nature's beautiful. It's unforgiving. You eventually forget what you saw here, but never forget the lesson. Nature will take you if it can. It'll take you, it'll reshape you, and it'll use you for whatever it needs. Be careful when you're in the woods. Always be courteous to the natural order. My girlfriend and I hiked back to the car in a somber silence, neither of us having much to say. We didn't camp that weekend, but I did propose 3 weeks later. I did it at our favorite restaurant, an Italian place in town where we'd had our first date, and she agreed with the exact amount of tears and squeals. I guess that makes her my fiancé now, and I'm glad to have her by my side. I've tried to forget what I saw in the woods that day, but I'm always mindful of my place when I'm in nature. Who's to say who might find me if I forget? The idea, as she explained it to me, was simple enough. I would sit with her, I would talk with her, and share those few final moments of her life. She had no family left. She'd outlived them all. The same, sadly, was said for her friends and anyone else that she would have otherwise called on for that task. I remember she told me the worst part of a long life was the gradual removal of all things that make life worth living. I was offered this unusual position whilst applying for a job only tangentially related to the kind of in-house care someone would provide to such an infirmed person. I suppose I had a look of youthful desperation about me, because one of the nurses at the facility, a tired-eyed woman not far from my age, asked if I'd like to make some money in the interim of my application's review. Naturally, I accepted, and was told about a kind-hearted 93-year-old widow nearing the end of her life. During our first phone call, the old woman had asked me to bring a few things, a tea kettle, a blanket, and a book of my choosing. On the morning of that fateful day, while finalizing our plans, she asked if I would read to her, and I happily agreed. I assumed the blanket and tea kettle were merely items of comfort, two things that would be in their own way providing warmth to her, since she had spoken many times about how she'd recently been so cold. On the phone, we had never discussed payment. It had been offered, of course, and was, initially, the reason I accepted the somewhat morbid task. $1,500 to sit with an old woman during her final moments of life. A span of time that she assured me would last no longer than a few hours. She mentioned that her physician would of course remain in the house, stationed in another room, and ready to confirm when it happened. Due to her condition, the details of which I had never explicitly told, I was not allowed to visit with her prior to the curiously foreknown date of her death. As previously stated, we did, however, speak on the phone several times, and I learned a few things about her. The most notable being that she hadn't any surviving family members or friends, that she was truly alone in the world. She had explained briefly and vaguely her religious beliefs, which, as far as I could tell, belonged to no regular organized religion, but was a set of spiritual principles and mythic ideas to which she had closely adhered and devoutly followed since childhood. These beliefs, from what I gathered, were based upon some sort of obscure cosmic mysticism that she claimed was older than even the Abrahamic religions. She never lingered long on the topic, so there's not much else I could say about it. Over the phone, she was kind, friendly, and surprisingly lively, at least vocally. For someone so close to the end, I actually found myself enjoying our conversations and quickly forgot about my original financial motivation. I wanted to meet this woman. I wanted to spend time talking to and laughing with her. When the day arrived, I drove to her house and parked in the driveway beside a car that looked like it hadn't moved in months. The sight saddened me. The idea that the woman was so mortally ill that driving herself around had been an impossibility for apparently quite some time. I'd never really experienced death before, never closely. And here I was, about to witness it firsthand with a complete stranger. I walked up the front lawn's path to the door, knocked, and a voice issued from a speaker mounted beneath the doorbell, inviting me in. I entered, noticed a row of shoes on a rack beside the door, and removed mine. I placed them on the second of 3 racks. The first was completely full, with shoes of varying sizes. Another speaker mounted beside a mirror in the foyer directed me rightward into a living room. In there I found the person with whom I was to spend the next hour or two. The room was wildly, densely decorated and furnished. There were pop culture memorabilia that dated back decades, and even to my historically untrained eye, seemingly centuries. Sculptures, busts, stuffed figures, plates, framed pictures, and many other honorary and commemorative objects of yesteryear sat on shelves, were mounted to walls, or piled into the surface of tables and chairs. It was as if within the room the entire recorded history of mankind had compiled itself into both mass-produced objects of entertainment and prized, untouched possessions of collectors. And sitting amidst it all, in a chair that had been outfitted with health-monitoring machinery, was an old woman. The woman I was to sit with in her final moments. I introduced myself softly, but her response was loud, surprisingly boisterous, considering her condition. On the phone, she'd been lively, but in person, her mannerisms and volume of speech truly belied her age and physical state. She welcomed me into the living room and invited me to sit in a chair across from her. I removed the dolls that had been seated there and placed them with others on a nearby table, then unpacked the items I brought, the tea kettle and the book, wrapped in a thick, hand-sewn blanket, a gift from my late grandmother. I offered to drape the blanket over the woman's gown, which she agreed to, and then asked where the kitchen was, expecting her to want tea as soon as possible. But to my surprise, she told me to set the kettle aside for the moment, and asked that I do the same for the book. She wanted to talk first. She wanted to continued the last conversation we had over the phone. We chatted for about 30 minutes, and although our meeting had been planned around her expected expiration, I still had yet to ask exactly how she had arrived at the time. She had no attempt to hasten things along. Our chat drifted to related topics, and circled back over after exhausting all conversational avenues. She was youthful in spirit, characteristically exuberant, even though her body had reached its biological limits. When 30 minutes had gone by, I asked somewhat anxiously if she'd like me to put the kettle on and begin reading. She agreed to the tea, but said that she'd prefer to keep story time saved for later. I went to the kitchen and started the kettle, fished out 2 packets of hibiscus tea that she'd had in the cupboard, and set them beside 2 cups that had already been set out, presumably by her yet-to-be-seen aide. The kitchen wasn't nearly as decorated as the living room, but the same motif of memorabilia was still present. Coffee cups bore images of old-timey celebrities, while framed recipes showed classic cartoon characters, those in chef hats and aprons, holding various cooking utensils. It was cute, charming, a glimpse into the past well before my time. When the tea was ready, I brought it into the living room on a steel tray and set it on the table that was roughly between us, then delicately handed her a cup and a little glass plate. She thanked me, sipped from the cup, and asked me a fairly unusual question. What do you remember most fondly from your childhood? It took a moment for me to think of something, but I finally recalled how when I was 7, my dad had taken my brother and I on a camping trip. How much fun it had been to have nature all to ourselves. We'd spent the weekend fishing, exploring, watching animals, an experience that was for us closely sheltered suburban kids, new, scary, mystifying at first. As I told the woman about the weekend, her face began to take on an even greater degree of excitement, as if she were drinking from the memories and regaining some semblance of her youth before my eyes. When I reached the story's conclusion, she clapped her hands, accidentally spilling the tea onto her lap. She yelped almost childishly and thanked me for having brought the quilt, otherwise the hot tea would have assuredly scarred her thighs. I scrambled up and asked her if there was any towels nearby, and still laughing, she pointed towards a closet at the end of the room, barely visible behind an antique armoire. I carefully slid the armoire aside, retrieved a few towels from a large stack therein, and would have gone back to the old woman if I hadn't seen something odd in the next room. When entering from the foyer, the living room had 2 exits. To the left is the kitchen, to the right, beside the aforementioned closet, is a threshold to another room. I hadn't noticed it before, just as I hadn't noticed the closet. But once beside it, I saw its door was slightly ajar, and through the slim open space, I saw someone sitting in a chair, facing away from the entryway. With my focus on my task being overruled by my curiosity, I entered the room. Unlike the room before it, this room was scarcely furnished. A bed, night table, box fan were the only objects in the room, aside from the person sitting in the foldable steel chair near a heavily curtained window. Despite the eclectic yet cozy decor throughout the rest of the house, I felt a strange, inexpressible atmosphere of hostility when entering this room. I sensed in a way that I can't describe that I wasn't welcome within the impersonal, Spartan space, but still, I continued on, drawing towards that unmovable figure in the chair by a weird magnetism, a volition that I wasn't sure was even my own. Still holding onto the towels, I walked around the chair, not wanting to startle the person by speaking or placing my hand on their shoulder. The chair was directly in the scope of the window, and yet the thick curtains allowed only the faintest of rays to filter through. There was no lights, and the space outside of that illuminated square was draped in a gloom that seemed unnatural, ominously manufactured. When I rounded the chair and came face to face with the person sitting therein, I dropped the towels and nearly fell to the floor from the shock of what I saw. The person sitting in the chair wore scrubs, and I'm sure that these had fit snugly at some point in their life, but the fabric that draped from the shriveled body seemed several sizes too large. Both portions of the outfit were also darkly stained in various places, and bore signs of savage violence. The fabric over the stomach had been torn, and the flesh beneath was shredded. The brown, decayed skin hanging in loose tatters. The most appalling aspect was the face, or the lack thereof. The hair had fallen out, or had been ripped out, leaving the scalp bald, and between the forehead and the neck, there existed only a gaping hole, a horrible, gruesome cavity, bereft of even the remnants of a skull. The head was held upright by some post-death seizing of the body, a faceless, statuesque lifelessness that would inspire nightmares after nightmares in the days after. I honestly doubt I screamed. In that dreadful moment, I could barely breathe, and yet the old woman came ambling into the room, claiming that she'd heard me cry out. Her eyes only briefly glanced at the corpse in the chair before noticing the towels I'd dropped. "Ah, you found them. Great. If you wouldn't mind, I'd love to dab the blanket. Wouldn't want the tea soaking through to my legs and bringing me a chill later." Her utter lack of regard for my shocked state in the corpse, which I only then noticed radiated a carnal stench more awful than anything I'd ever smelled, told me that she had known about it the entire time. Weakly, my nerves barely operated in my fright. I pointed to the corpse, and the woman looked at it again. Only this time she clapped her hands and shouted, "Oh!" as if noticing a pet that she had yet to introduce to me. "So you've met Elizabeth. She was my caretaker. A sweet girl, single mother of 2 boys, who I've been told are the best. She's been with me for, 4 months now. And before her was Yolanda, and before that was a young man. You would have loved him. Marcus, I think his name was. Yeah, he was a nice boy. They were all so nice, so helpful, just like you've been." The woman's demeanor hadn't changed. She spoke as if she was recalling old friends, and yet on an instinctual level, I immediately understood that I was in grave danger. The blanket was still wrapped around her, trailing damply on the floor. I hadn't noticed before. I hadn't gotten a sense of her stature when she'd been seated, but in that room, with her standing only a few feet away, I realized for the first time how tall she was. She towered over me, standing at a height that was undoubtedly at least 6'5", and adding to the strangeness of her erected form was that her legs, from what I could tell through the cover of the blanket, were incredibly long, disproportionately so in relation to her torso. "Now why don't I grab these towels from you, and we can head back to the other room and finish our tea. Think I'm ready for that story now." I stood there, frozen by fear and uncertainty as the woman calmly approached me, but instead of bending over and reaching down for the towels, something she'd logically have to do given her pretty natural height, she instead lifted the blanket and the gown beneath and outstretched something that was not a leg, but an appendage that resembled a thickly corded drawstring. But this limb was made of lustrous black flesh rather than a tightly woven thread, and it moved with an unsettling dexterity. At the end of the monstrous limb were several fat digits that writhed in an undulant, repulsive manner, and with these she grasped the towel and raised them up to her torso, where she received them with her human arms. The horrible limb was then retracted back beneath the gown, and before she let the fabric fall, I saw others. A veritable trunk of tautly wound black cords, with which the freed limb re-entwined itself in a manner that was efficient as it was sickening. She then lowered the gown, threw the blanket over the chair-seated corpse, and dabbed the damp spot with the towels. Once satisfied, she wrapped the blanket around herself and returned to the living room, beckoning me to follow as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Dumbstruck, horrified, I followed against my will. I was led into the room as if under some spell. I returned to my seat across from her, and with the mindless, mechanical motions of one whose willpower had been entirely depleted and supplanted by another's, I read from the book that I'd brought. It was a collection of short stories by Arthur Machen. She'd mentioned on the phone that she'd enjoyed stories about weird and mythical things. And after finishing 3 stories, she again clapped her hands, signifying that I should stop. I closed the book and I laid it on my lap, whilst my brain struggled to come to terms with the unprecedentedly bizarre circumstances. The woman applauded my narration, even though I couldn't remember adding any sort of vocal flavor to the reading. It had been fairly straightforward, done almost absent-mindedly. I thanked her for the compliments and tried to blink away the tears that uncontrollably swelled beneath my eyes. Now I think we arrived at the time. I can't thank you enough for this wonderful afternoon. I'm so thankfully grateful for your company. A woeful old woman like myself couldn't have asked for a better companion to sit vigil with her. Thank you, child. I have initially planned on incorporating you into the family, but now I just can't bring myself to do that. Truly been the best of all those who've sat with me during my ends. The plural of that final word and the dreadful, vague connotation of it broke me completely. The tears fell and I sunk inward, entirely consumed by terror. The woman, misinterpreting my fear of her for sadness at her imminent passing, urged me not to cry, saying that death comes to everyone eventually. Her demeanor then became suddenly and strikingly somber, and she asked if I'd kindly leave her to be alone. Needing no further motivation, I arose from my seat, leaving behind everything I'd brought, and sprinted out of the living room. But before I could reach the front door and return to the normal, sunlit world, she called out, "Oh, your payment is on the Davenport, the sofa, in the white envelope." After a brief war of wills, the broke and hungry student versus the terrified human, I begrudgingly returned to the room and, careful to keep my eyes focused on the sofa that sat just beside the room's entryway. And while I never looked directly at the woman, I glimpsed and heard her awful transformation into something else. Perceived audibly and peripherally the death of her human shell. I escaped the house without having witnessed the full exposure of that abominable thing that had clothed itself in human skin for who knows how long, and had hidden itself amongst mankind through cycles of life that assuredly dated back further than the house's memorabilia would have had you believe. As I stumbled down the driveway, I happened to glance inside the car parked there and was given one final parting moment of horror. The car hadn't belonged to the old woman. Its owner, I think, was Elizabeth. From the back seat, I saw 2 children's backpacks, but no sign of the children themselves. In about 2 hours, I made $1,500, and yet I'd give it all back to erase my memories of that twisted afternoon. I can only hope that the police, who I called shortly after departing, could bring some kind of closure to the families of the victims. Justice to the murderer whose death I doubt had any permanent meaning. Dear parents or guardians, in compliance with the 85th Legislature, Senate Bill 1566, Section 14, Subchapter A, Chapter 38, Section 38.031, we are required to inform parents that a student or students in your children's grade level have been found to have head lice. There is no law in our state that addresses excluding children with head lice from school. Lice are not a public threat. They do not carry disease. As such, the Department of Health and State Service does urge school districts to ensure that its policies and procedures do not cause children to miss class unnecessarily. Our goal is to keep all parents informed about identified cases of head lice and how to treat and prevent them. Our challenge is to accomplish this without causing embarrassment and isolation for students who suffer from cases of head lice. Thank you in advance for working with our school to make sure that we have the best possible environment for our students. I've dealt with head lice before. Some girl brought it over when Misty, my oldest, had a sleepover about 2 years ago. I thought I knew what to do, and since the email came through Thursday night, I thought that I would have time to handle it. I immediately got Jonah out of his school clothes and told him to get in the shower and soap his hair thoroughly. My plan was to run down to CVS and buy some strong ivermectin. I know the stuff kind of stinks, but it does the trick. Well, that never happened. Instead, as I tossed his clothes in the dryer, then began to do the same thing with his bed sheets, I realized he was taking longer in the shower than normal and shouted to him, "Is everything okay?" When he didn't respond, I became worried. I rattled the door and eventually got it loose, running into the bathroom to see that he had collapsed unconscious in the shower. Immediately, I dialed 911 and turned off the water. I started checking him for injuries, especially the head. And that was when I saw what the school had said. It was lice. These did not look like tiny little insects that I had seen on Misty. They looked a little bigger, with larger pincers and a little more aggressive than a typical head lice. It looked like when Jonah had washed his hair, they had begun to dig into his scalp to keep him from drowning and caused his skin to become even more agitated. The paramedics came in less than 10 minutes, and we made it to the hospital in about 30. I told them what I had saw, and they ordered tests. When they got back and we were waiting on results, I asked him how he was feeling. "My whole head is on fire," he admitted. They had placed bandages on the irritated skin, and I told him to lean forward so I can get a better look. Pulling the gauze away, I found myself stifling back a wail as I saw the redness in his scalp was now much worse, and the strange tiny creatures that were digging into his skin had gone even deeper, creating cuts in his flesh. I called for a nurse and asked if there was any way for us to just shave his head and begin immediate treatment, but she insisted I needed to wait for a doctor. Jonah kept scratching and scratching, even making himself bleed, and I eventually couldn't wait any longer and went to find the shavers myself. On the way to the nurse's station, I ran into one of the techs that had been running a scan of Jonah, and I asked if the results were in. He told me no, but offered to assist me with the shaving. We hurried back to the room, and I told Jonah to turn his head, and we took off the wrappings, and the tech covered his mouth in shock. It looked like the top of my son's head was peeling off and rotting the way an old banana does. Scars and bruises seemed to cover the part of the scalp that we could see, and something told me when we began to shave, things would get even worse. I told Jonah to remain still as the tech started the process, but it wasn't easy. I could see that when the blade was cutting his hair, it was also causing pain to my son. I gripped his hand and I tried to hold him, but it wasn't working. The creatures were burrowing deeper into his scalp, and when we got down to the bare skin, I could see that everything we were doing was only causing him more harm than good. I told the tech to stop, tears welling in my eyes as I held Jonah, and he moaned in pain. That kept going for 20 minutes until the main ER doctor entered the room with the results. His face told me that it wasn't what I would want to hear. "We've never seen anything like this before," he said, as he showed me what the scans revealed. The insects were larger than I anticipated, longer and cylindrical. They had dug straight into my son's skin and even hit his bone, and it looked like they were intending to go deeper. This could cause brain damage if left untreated. I recommend a full round of broad-spectrum antibiotics, and then we schedule Jonah for surgery to get these removed, the doctor said. I asked him how long that might be, and he told me the only pediatric surgeon wasn't available until Monday. Meaning my son would be writhing in pain and experiencing possible damage in his mental health because no one here is qualified, I asked, shocked. They admitted there was little more they could do, but they attempted to contact other hospitals in the Tri-County area. I sat there for an hour trying to decide what I should do as Jonah continued to try and scratch. Eventually, I asked the nurse to bind his hands to a stretcher as I realized his nails were ripping off bits of flesh. The nurses and other staff seemed to begin to give us a wide berth, and I got the idea they were frightened by the unusual conditions as well. Another hour passed, and they gave Djenna a sedative to let him rest as I checked his scalp. The damage these things had done to my son's head was beyond horrific. They had caused large scars to cover every bit of his forehead and cranial area, eating up his skin and burning away any of his tissue and muscles. I could even see faint hints of his skull where there was bruising. In that moment, I sobbed and took out my phone. Desperation made me call Djenna's dad, someone that I hadn't talked to in almost 2 years. "I can pull some strings and get to a surgeon, but we'll have to drive all night to get here," he said. I told him it was worth it, and then demanded they let me check Djenna out so that we could begin the drive. Of course, the doctors advised otherwise, but I wasn't about to just let him lay there suffering for a few more days. Putting him in the backseat of the car, I gave him pillows and blankets to keep him comfortable and began the drive. It was so late and I was exhausted, but I pushed through, constantly checking the rearview mirror to see his condition. He woke up about an hour into the drive, moaning in pain and asking me to pull over. "Sweetie, I can't. I'm trying to get you to a doctor," I told him. He began to vomit blood in the back seat, and I braked hard. Putting my flashers on, I got out of the way of oncoming traffic and unbuckled. "It hurts so bad, Mom," he said. I offered him the last of the pain pills as I stared at the bandages around his head. They were soaked in blood from the damage these insects were causing. He tried his best to swallow it. Then I laid him back down and gave him a McDonald's bag to keep puking into. I had to focus on the drive. My mom called about 10 minutes later, checking on us and reporting that Misty was sound asleep. "How's our boy? Did you get that lice handled?" she asked. She seemed to think my trip to the hospital was an overreaction, and before I could explain the situation, he vomited again, and I hung up. All Djenna could do was shake and scream, begging me to give him more medicine, but I had nothing to offer. I sped up, placing my emergency flashers on. I had to get to my ex-husband as quickly as possible. I made it there by 3:30 in the early morning, and drizzle came down as I pulled my car up to the ER that he told me to head for. Djenna had been scratching again, and the bandages were torn apart. His head hardly had any skin left. It was now just a mangled mess of blood and loose hair and tissue. He pulled back his bloody nails, and I saw bits of bone from his skull were also tearing off. As the rain hit his scalp, he shuddered in agony. "My God," my ex said when he saw how bad it was, and they rushed our son towards the operating room. He had dozens of questions, but neither me nor any of the surgeons had answers. They began to get Djenna prepped for an attempt at extracting these damn bugs when we got more bad news. Scans reveal these things are like fishing barbs. They burrow deep through the skin and the tissue and then latch on to prevent themselves from being taken easily. There's a risk this could cause more harm to your son than good, the head surgeon told us. I was trying my best not to hyperventilate. "Just do whatever you have to do to help him," I begged. They promised me that they would. I had to sign a mountain of paperwork which gave them consent and, of course, waived any liabilities. Djenna was unconscious from the pain, but his body was still reacting to it. His stats were rising along with his core body temperature. I was certain that the insects were already attacking his brain. Thankfully, my ex-husband didn't have the opportunity to spew hateful words at me about being an awful mother. Instead, we were both in an almost catatonic state as we waited for some good news. But good news never came. The doctors came out about an hour later to inform us that Djenna was not showing any signs of brain activity. His body's still fighting, but it doesn't look like he'll be returning home the way that he came here, they admitted. One of the surgeons said this gave them an opportunity to quit being cautious, and they began to extract the slimy, writhing bugs. I got a chance to see one before they killed it. The thing reminded me of a long, thin centipede, covered in prickly needles. I'm certain that it hissed and shrieked as the doctors crushed it, and continued to remove others. 6 hours later, there was no bugs left, and our son was in a medically induced coma. It felt like I was dying, seeing him suffer. And I felt powerless, not knowing if he was going to be okay. I found sleep, only thanks to exhaustion. When I woke up, it was this morning, and I charged my phone. Mom had called me twice. Hey, sorry I missed your call. Yeah, Jonah's fine, I said groggily. No, it's fine. I just wanted to give you a heads up about Misty. I became more alert almost instantly. Is something the matter? Well, it's just that she's complaining about her head itching really badly. What? Is she okay? My heart dropped at her response. I'm sure she's fine. I sent her to school. You know, she has that field trip today. I mean, it's just head lice, right? The door is locked, and the gaps are plugged with towels. But I don't think it'll make any difference. I hear my neighbors driving by outside the barricaded window, completely unaware of the horrors taking place inside this house. I guess I just want someone else to know the truth. It started as these things often do, with something completely unexpected. An event that came screeching in out of the dark to smash the quiet life that I'd built for my wife, Alice, and our son, Jake. We tried so hard to childproof our house. We protected the power outlets, used baby gates, and stored dangerous chemicals far out of reach. I don't know where Jake got a hold of that small glass bead. I mean, maybe he found it outside, in the street, or at the playground. All I know is the moment he swallowed it, that little ball of glass cut off his air supply completely. Alice and I tried desperately to remember the Heimlich maneuver and perform it on our squirming, crying, purple-faced child. But we only made things worse. By the time the EMT arrived, Jake had stopped breathing. He lay in my wife's arms, limp and lifeless as a rag doll, drool dribbling out of his bluish lips. The looks on the paramedics' faces when they finally arrived told us everything we needed to know. Despite their best resuscitation efforts, our son was gone. I still remember the way that my wife's hot tears soaked through my shirt as we walked out to the ambulance with Jake. I just wanted to hold his tiny hand until the last minute, until they loaded him into that sterile metal box and the doors closed on him forever. Then, suddenly, Jake grabbed my finger. His eyes snapped open, and with a pop, the cat's eyes beat popped out of his mouth. The paramedics couldn't believe it. The resuscitation efforts had ended 8 minutes ago, and Jake had been legally dead for almost half an hour. Lazarus syndrome, they called it. But, I didn't care about names or diagnoses. I didn't care about tests and trials, clinical statistics. I was just happy to have my son back. And Jake was quieter than I remembered before. His big blue eyes had sparked like sunlight on the sea. But now, however, they seemed darker, deeper somehow. Like I was looking into a still, bottomless pool. I found that I couldn't maintain eye contact with him for long. Maybe that was the first sign. Maybe that's when I should have acted. But it's too late now. And like most new parents, Alice and I had been terrified to leave Jake's side at first. He kept his crib in our bedroom, but after his recovery, we found we couldn't sleep with Jake nearby. He would stand and stare at us all night, his hands grabbing the bars of his crib like a death row inmate in teddy bear pajamas. Although Alice and I never talked about it, we could both feel his gaze probing at the back of our skulls, as though he was trying to drill them open and let something in. A few weeks later, we moved Jake's crib into my office. That's why we were so terrified to find him in bed with us at 3 a.m. the next night. He lay, sucking his thumb with one hand, and had the other on Alice's hip in a way that seemed strangely adult and possessive. Worse still, when I looked at that hand out of the corner of my eye, it didn't seem like a toddler's arm at all. It looked stretched, hairy, and horrible. When I carried my sleeping son back to his crib, I wondered if I was having some kind of psychological reaction to the trauma of Jake's death and unexpected resuscitation. That could have been the only explanation for the things that I was seeing and feeling. Right? As I put Jake back in his crib, I noticed something red on his lip. With awful adult intelligence, he quickly tried to hide it from me, but I spun him back around. Jake opened his mouth wide. A waterfall of blood poured out. I'd never seen so much in my life. I screamed for Alice and looked around for something, anything, to stop the bleeding. Behind me, I could hear the gory stream spattering on the floor. That wasn't all. When I turned again, hundreds of round cat's eye beads were dribbling from my son's mouth. "What?" Alice burst into the room with a shout. I pointed to Jake. But he was fine. Our son sat sleepily in his crib with a puzzled expression on his face, as though he was concerned about my weird behavior. I tried to stammer an explanation to Alice on our walk back to bed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my son was laughing silently at me behind my back. From there, things only got worse. The next night, I woke from a revolting dream in which a giant leech was writhing around inside of my sheets, sucking me dry. And just like in the dream, there was a weight on my chest when I woke. It was Jake, giggling as he crawled around our bed. It was all I could do to keep myself from shoving him off of me. "This is your son," I told myself. "You love him." And it was true. But more and more I was starting to wonder whether the thing inside the crib was really Jake at all. I installed a bolt on Jake's bedroom door. Surely that would stop his late-night wanderings. But the next night my son was back in bed with us again. I placed a motion-activated camera in the hallway, hoping to figure out how on earth Jake had opened the bolt. And what I saw in that eerie night vision footage, that will haunt me for the rest of my life. Something slid beneath my son's door, a hand. At first it looked like Jake's, but as the arm stretched upwards towards the lock and the fingers extended, its appearance changed into something monstrous. My son's arm had somehow passed beneath the door, reached all the way up its length, and unbolted its lock with clawed, hairy fingers. The hideous arm retracted, the door creaked open, and Jake crawled along the ceiling towards our bedroom. The last still image the camera captured was Jake's freakishly extended foot and snarling face as he kicked it away. I watched the clip again and again, unable to reconcile what I'd seen with the toddler dozing peacefully just a few feet away. During the day, Jake was completely normal. He threw tantrums, colored, played with his toys, asked a few questions every 5 seconds. He fell asleep eating his Cheerios. Maybe it was just at night when he would... A sudden thump jolted me out of my reverie. Jake was awake. In fact, he was standing right next to me, a lifeless expression on his face. He just slammed his little fist onto my computer right above the port where I'd inserted the camera's SD card. Was he trying to destroy the video? Thump! Jake brought his fist down 2 more times with impossible strength, shattering my laptop's fragile plastic covering and the SD card inside. And that wasn't all. My mind didn't want to process it. I couldn't process it. But Jake had grown taller than me. I looked down in horror at the extra 40 inches of deformed flesh that started at my son's pajama bottoms and extended in the clawed feet on the floor. I shut my eyes and clamped down a scream, and when I opened them again, Jake was crawling around the rug, completely fixated on the toy truck in front of him. His face and body were completely normal. But my laptop was a broken mess. Jake, or whatever was inside of him, was getting more powerful. Alice and I felt hunted inside our own home. Whenever we tried to discuss what was happening to Jake, we'd hear his tiny feet scurrying impossibly fast, and suddenly he'd be standing right beside us, listening, watching with those dark blue, endlessly deep eyes. After what happened last night, I suppose I can't blame Alice. I can't blame Alice for leaving. I'd spent the day installing a key-operated lock on Jake's bedroom door. I set up a baby camera in the room that streamed live to Alice and I. In case he needs us, I told myself. But the truth was, I'd set it up for our own protection. If Jake started... If he started to change, we'd know about it. The new setup was supposed to help us sleep, but in the end, Alice and I just lay awake, watching what was happening on the other side of the baby camera. We stared at our perfectly normal, snoring, thumb-sucking toddlers, though we were watching a tense scene in a horror movie, the kind so terrifying that it's impossible to look away. We'd gone without sleep for so long, I suppose it was only a matter of time. I couldn't blame Alice when she dozed off on my shoulder. I kept nodding off as well. I tried to tell myself that one of us needed to keep watching. But every time I looked up, the scene on the screen was unchanged. The small, cute shape of Jake in his onesie pajamas, one arm around his teddy bear. Maybe things are fine now. The treacherous, exhausted part of my mind whispered to me, maybe the danger, or whatever it was, maybe it's past. My chin hit my chest. My eyes popped open with a start. A dark shape, probably Jake's teddy bear, lay in front of the camera, blocking it. And where was our son? At first, I didn't notice the sound coming from beside me. I turned slowly, almost not wanting to see, and saw Jake's monstrous fingers toying with my wife's hair. His open mouth pressed against hers, and something bulky and hideous was sliding down her throat. Although whether Jake was draining something out of Alice or infesting her with something of his own, I couldn't tell. My whole world became that horrible, strangled sound, those 2 entangled fingers lit only by the eerie green glow of the screen, and my own paralyzing fear. Alice's hand struggling feebly, trying to pry Jake off of her face. It was only then that I found the strength to act. I grabbed Jake from behind and pulled. It took both of our combined strength to pry him, screeching and flailing off Alice's face, both of their mouths still covered with a lipstick smear coated of bright red blood. Alice coughed and spit something up, a tiger's eye glass bead. She stared at it for a long second, and then she grabbed her purse and she walked out the door. I could hear Jake giggling beside me as Alice started her car in the misty 4 a.m. darkness. Even then, I knew in my heart I'd never see her again. I've been home alone with Jake since then. He's been testing the boundaries, changing more often and more obviously. I think he knows that no help is coming for me. I could hear him running through the house, laughing, smashing things for fun. It's only a matter of time now. I'm not afraid of death. The moment Alice left, I accepted my fate. No, see, what I'm afraid of is, what if death isn't the end? What if, after whatever Jake does to me, I just wake up again and spit a tiger's eye ball of glass out onto the floor? What if I wake up as something else? Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and before we get started on tonight's story, I'm going to let you know about two books. Both are available on Amazon, and both are from Jesse Pullins, tonight's author. The first is Undulating Flesh, a flash fiction amalgamation. Undulating Flesh will be available on Amazon for free starting today, April 15th, running all the way until April 20th. On April 20th, the release of the second book, Aggravated Flesh, another flash fiction amalgamation, will be on Amazon, available on Kindle, paperback, and hardcover. If you want to find out more about these books or get your copy for free, then check out the link in the description down below. And now, on to tonight's story. I seem to have misplaced my pills. It's not good. The regular spot in the medicine cabinet was empty. A tiny little space much like the one I felt in my stomach. It's been so long since I missed this scheduled dose. I fear what'll happen if I go without it for too long. I've been doing so good. How did I fuck this up? I ring the office as I gather my laundry, listening to the dial tone as I pack t-shirts and jeans into a garbage bag. It rings and rings, feeding my anxiety as I contemplate whether I should even go outside. Is it even safe? Is it safe for me to be around other people? It keeps ringing, and I feel the racing in my mind, held back by a tiny leash. Voicemail. Please leave a message after the beep. God, how did I fuck this up? Pure stupidity. I mumble my embarrassing apology to the answering machine, disguising my begging smoothly so I don't seem like an absolute wreck. I pocket my phone and I grab my keys. I put my bag over my shoulder and put my hand on the knob. And hesitate. I should just stay in. I don't have any clean clothes. I have to do laundry. The laundromat is only a block away. I'll go do my laundry and come back home. We'll sort it out then. I leave the apartment trying to keep my head high. Maybe I don't even need the pills anymore. Maybe I'm better now. Down the steps and on the street, people pass and I give friendly nods. They all look so cheery. The fresh air is nice. It feels good not to take the pills. I hate taking them anyway. The air is crisp today. The snow is melting. Everyone looks pleasant. I'm glad I left the house. The laundromat is empty. The laundromat is empty. The laundromat is empty. The laundromat is empty. I pushed through the door and picked my machine. They're all 8-load monsters, an entire family's worth in one go. I pick one on the back wall so I can watch the street through the window. I check the time, 3:15 p.m. After the jeans dry, I could probably be home by 5. Gotta hang the shirts up at home. Drying makes them shrink. I toss the bag in my machine and start loading everything in. I think of my pills and how I don't have them. The feeling of failing crawling up my back like rats. I need to call the office. Let them know I misplaced them. I'll get the load started first. A waterfall of clothes. Shake the bag out. Get everything. The knob on the machine is satisfying. The metallic drag of the coin drawer is satisfying. I'm satisfied. The washing machine groans and fills with water. It's always so pleasant to wash, especially when the soap mixes in. The walls are meat. I look at the soapy water. So soothing. I ring the doc's office. Can't forget that. Hey, yeah, I don't really know where they went. I think it would be a good idea to get a refill, as long as the doc thinks it's alright. I haven't gone without for a while. Give me a call back. I grab a seat and I watch the street. People pass by. Some busy. Some not. Parents with their kids. Couples holding hands. A woman jogging with pods in. An old man in aviators looking a bit like a grumpy frog. I stretch and I look at the tumbling laundry. The soothing soap drizzling over the glass. The soft sunlight from the outside is relaxing. I can't think. I watch the tumbling clothes and my stomach starts sinking slowly. There's a man agitating in the washer, tumbling over and over again. The washing machine bucks wildly, thrashing against the other units next to it. The noise peels the paint inside my skull. Wham, 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 wham. The man looks at me from within the washer. He's trying to reach for me. And even in the blur, I can see his piercing eyes, his white teeth. He's talking to me. Let me out. I rub my eyes. I'm sweating badly. The cool light from the street soothes me. The blood in the washing machine is soap again. Get it together. You don't need the medicine. You're fine without it. I'm fine without it. I rub my eyes, tapping my feet on the floor. God, how could I make? God, how could I make such a mistake? It's stupid. It's just so stupid. I get my phone out and check recents, clicking the number for the office. Weird. I'm saying it's the 9th time. That can't be right. It's lying. I dial and hold the phone to my ear, standing up. I'm pacing a little bit. It's ringing. I watch the people on the street as it keeps ringing. They look so happy. Why can't I just be fucking happy? I watch them pass by, and the dial tone is getting quieter. A man with a suitcase is walking past like he's in a hurry. I watch him walk, and the dial tone is gone. It's silent. The phone is silent. The man with the suitcase stops and looks at me through the window. Please leave a message after the beep. The man with the suitcase is mouthing the words, but I can't hear him. I feel the trickle of sweat on my back and I shiver. When did it get so fucking cold in here? The man with the suitcase puts his hands on the glass. His hands must be hot. They're fogging the glass. His eyes. They look too far apart. I lower the phone, making sense of the words he's mouthing. The same word on repeat. Sunday. It's Sunday. The doctor's office is closed. I look at the washer. The clothes have stopped. I sit in my chair, hands over my ears. I can hear them. I can hear the walls. I can hear them writhe around me, gestating, undulating flesh. The street is dark outside, the light's gone, nobody's walking the streets now. Not people anymore. I'm trying not to look at them. The walls are meat, and I feel them getting closer, shifting closer. They move when I'm not looking. I can see them in the corner of my eye. The flesh. It's coming. I had the courage to check my phone and ignore the smiling reflection in the black screen. I checked the time, 9:30 p.m. I seem to have misplaced my pills. Somebody help me. Help me. Please. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and before we get started on tonight's story, I'm going to let you know about 2 books that are currently available by tonight's author, Jesse Pullins. Undulating Flesh, a flash fiction amalgamation, has been available for free for the past couple of days, leading up to today, which is the release of the second book, Aggravated Flesh, by Jesse Pullins, another flash fiction amalgamation. You can find a link to both books in the description down below. I strongly suggest you check them out. I'm not sure if the first book is still available for the giveaway, but if it is, hey, you have a little bit of time left to grab it before it goes back to full price. The second book you can also grab if you've already got the first one. It should be available now on Kindle and paperback. And now, on to tonight's story. Going out for a late-night drive. I found myself at a red light. The weather was nice, I didn't have anywhere to be, so a nice little cruise to clear my head seemed like the right thing to do. I've had a lot on my mind lately. A nighttime cruise sounded mentally satisfying. After all, I've been doing so good, no reason not to. Ahead, the traffic lantern sways in the breeze, the red glow beaming through its weathered lenses. There's no one else at the intersection, and the empty streets start to make me feel antsy. My palms start to sweat, and I readjust my grip on the wheel as I look around. To my left, there's a gas station. An old mom and pop looking place, with a single duo of pumps, standing under a flickering light. When I look through the window, there doesn't seem to be anyone working behind the counter. Maybe they're taking out the trash? To my right, there seems to be a bar that closed up for the night. The parking lot's empty, their neon sign shut off. I try to make out the name, but it's too dark. The 6th something. Maybe I'd have to come back some other time in the daylight and check it out. The light ahead remains red. No matter, I'm not in a hurry. I crack my knuckles nervously and turn on the radio. Some soothing music will do the trick. I tune the dial to find a station, watching the needle move on the dash as I navigate the static. The walls are meat. The needle wobbles back and forth, but nothing can really come through. Must be too far from the local stations. Something about the aggravated static makes me uneasy, and I feel myself starting to sweat. Gotta look at the red light again. Get distracted. Across the street, there's a fox walking in the grass. One that's pulling a tiny leash behind it. It stops and looks at me momentarily, tilting its head in interest. Something about it makes me uncomfortable. I feel the condensation of sweat on my brow. I rub my eyes, feeling the glimmer of a migraine behind it. It passes. When I look down, I see a relief to the unending static on the radio. Sitting in the cup holder is a cassette tape. Seems too good to be true. I grab the tape and look at it. It's an old tape. One that looks like it's seen much use. Celine Dion's Falling Into You album. Perfect. I look around the intersection and see it's still empty. I have time to put it in. At last, some kind of reassurance for this damn red light. I check both ways again and lean over to put the tape in. The rectangular plastic of the cassette is satisfying. The crisp drag of it entering the deck is satisfying. I'm satisfied. As the tape plays over the speakers, I feel myself relax. I've been doing so good. It's better now. I'm better now. I sink into my seat as the piano intro starts, and I feel like I can breathe again. The music calms the buzzing in my head, and my nerves start to calm. Now, if only the light would change, and I could get on with my peaceful drive. Across the street, the fox continues to look at me. I pay it no mind. I place my hands back on the steering wheel. It's nice out tonight. Through the haze of the windshield, I look up at the red light. I don't know why it refuses to change, but I'm patient. It'll get there. It's fine. Everything's fine. I glance at all lanes of the intersection, thinking maybe a car is going to come. I didn't see it. That's why it's taking so long. The streets are empty. The streets are empty. The streets are empty. I look nervously at the gas station to my left, expecting it to be empty, and it's not. Something is standing behind the register. It looks like a man in a metal suit, like knight's armor, horribly modified with a tail made of wires and computer parts. No, I whisper to myself, looking away. I've been doing so good, there's no way it's gotten away from me. It's not really there. I know it's not, so I look to the right and make sure. The parking lot of the closed bar is no longer empty. Something stands tall amongst the rows of painted lines. A large horse in a suit. Human hands stapled where the front hooves should be. No, I say again, feeling a rush of bile in my throat. I swallow and keep it down, along with the murmur of the migraine that begins to return. I've been doing good. Really. It's fine. Everything's fine. It's been fine for a while. Really. The familiar cold sweat returns, hands clammy on the wheel. The song rises over the speakers of the playing tape, and I plead for it to comfort me as I look desperately at the red light. Why won't it change? Why won't it just change? I don't want to do this. I can't do this. Above, the red light mocks me. Across the street, the fox mocks me. It looks at me in judgment, its face twisting as it looks like it's trying to gag. Something behind it stirs in the trees, and I can faintly make out the outline of a large rack of antlers and a writhing mass of slick tentacles. Please, please, please! I beat my hands on the steering wheel, feeling myself crumble under the weight of it all. Above, the light is red. Behind me, I see the headlights of another car. I watch them in the rearview mirror, and I feel the welling of tears in my eyes. The hair on my neck stands straight. My armpits are moist. A stream of sweat drizzles down my temple. I want to feel for my phone, but I don't think I have it. I don't think I've had it for a while. Behind me, the car slows for the red light and pulls in the lane next to me. The car stops. The groan of another engine idling, threatening my music. I don't want to look at them, so I don't. I don't care who it is. I try to focus on the music, but it's hard to hear it. I decide I'm going to run the red light. I mash the pedal to the floor, but the car doesn't move. I try again and again, each time harder than the last. I look at the fuel gauge and see I have no gas. Every light on the dash is on now. a collective of symbols telling me I'm not going anywhere soon. Deep breaths. You can do this. Deep breaths. Breathe. You've been doing good. You've been... Across the street, the fox is vomiting what looks like a man. Tearing fur makes way for a head and naked body. A slimy face with eyes that open in time to look at me. Please, I say again, looking away from the oral birth to the car next to me. The window rolls down, revealing two men in suits and close-cropped hair. They watch me wordlessly, eyes shielded behind sunglasses and a film of cigarette smoke that billows out. They say nothing, only watch as the sound of my music fades away to nothing. No. I try to turn the volume down, but the radio explodes with noise. The sounds of 100 screams fill my ears so loud it hurts. I scream against the noise, but it doesn't stop. I hit the stop button, try to eject the tape, anything. The screams become too much, and I find myself tearing off my seatbelt, fleeing the car. Outside of the car, it's silent again. A fog is rolling in, one that wafts over the intersection until it's consumed by it. I look to the gas station for help, only to see the inside of it painted red. Inside the station, a man in a hard hat is getting mutilated, watching me with a smile as a metal alligator human tears through his guts with gloves made of knives. The alloy abomination snarls and stomps the man on the ground, crushing both his skull and the hard hat with a large steel boot. Outside, a garbage truck rumbles to life at the gas pump. Please. Over the crisp night air, I hear the neigh of the horseman. He's closer now, standing on the side of the road. He downs what looks like a glass of whiskey before squeezing it in his hand so hard it shatters. His unnatural hand runs the thumb over its fingers, shards of glass serrating the pale digits. Across the street, the fox completes its purge. The naked man rises from the fetal position in the grass, standing tall and awkward with a face and eyes that look like mine. Behind him, the deer monstrosity emerges from the woods. A portrait of animal gore of all kinds shifting under 100 reaching feelers. I turn to get away, to get back into the car, but when I turn around, my car is gone. The men in sunglasses watch without emotion, their eyes bleeding from behind the sunglasses. After staring at me for a long moment, they turn their heads in unison to face the intersection. The trunk of their car pops, and a clown climbs out with a wooden bat in his hands. He points past me with the club, in the same direction the men in sunglasses are looking. Please help me. My voice chokes when I follow their gaze, and I want to cover my eyes as the fog retreats and fast forward. In the intersection, there's no red light. The pavement has crumbled in on itself, forming a crater where the street used to be. I don't want to see it, but I have to. I can't look away. My feet move on their own, and I ignore the abominations as I focus on the gaping hole. It calls me, and I can't seem to resist its voice. I look down in the pit, wishing I could stop, even as I lower myself to climb in. There's something down there, and I need to see it. I make my descent, hands and shoes navigating the jagged concrete and twisted rebar as I blink away tears. As I near the bottom, the things from above gather around, each silently observing as I go deeper and deeper. I don't want to go, but I don't know how to stop. I scream at them for help and they ignore me. I curse at them angrily, shouting and pleading until I feel the purchase of flat ground beneath my feet. My breath shudders as I turn, but my body continues on autopilot to the center. Laying on the ground is a Hawaiian shirt. The fabric is frayed and dirty, the floral pattern torn in multiple places. I reach down to grab it, but it ignites into a ball of fire, stitches withering and turning black against the flame. Through the smoke of the smoldering shirt, a door materializes in the wall of the rock. I don't understand. I don't want to. I want to cry, but the tears won't come. I look above for guidance and see the rim of the pit is outlined with a silent audience. The naked man that looks like me, the standing horse in a suit with stapled-on hands, the men in sunglasses bleeding from their eyes, the horror with the head of a deer, the metal alligator monster. In unison, they point to the door. I don't want to go, but I know I must. I need to see what they wanted to show me. Reluctantly, I head to the door. I hear the screams trying to get out, a chorus of pain and death and fear and welcoming and warning. I feel an angry heat the closer I get, and the knob is hot to the touch. When I open the door, it feels like my skull is breaking in two. I step in and the door slams behind me, a momentary darkness transitioning to a single flickering light. Behind the door, the walls are meat, gestating, aggravated flesh. They squirm and wiggle, arms reaching and eyes staring as I break before them. I shiver and hug myself as it all comes back to me like a bomb detonating in the calm ocean that was my brain. I want to say I've been doing good, but I know it's a lie. I recognize the laundromat, even in its appalling state. Washing machines thrash on either side, the clanging of metal boxes squelching in the gore that's replaced the tiled floor. In the center of the room stands an old television on a cart, overgrown by tendons and sprouting teeth. Around me, everything screams. I look behind the glass of every agitating machine, and all I see is a mass of pounding limbs fighting to get out. Fingers and toes kicking and screaming, digits breaking against the glass. I want to be far away from here, back in the car on the open road. Behind me, the door is gone, replaced by a stretch of skin and veins. The light goes out, and all I can hear is the convulsing of the meat and the banging of the broken machines. In the darkness, the walls come for me, and I can only cower and sob as they draw near. In the dark, the television blinks to life. Even as I watch the walls close in and the writhing corridor narrow around me, the picture is old and grainy, but I'd recognize the scene. Like it's a movie I saw long ago. A man in a straitjacket, kicking against men in white coats. The man thrashes inconsolably, even as they stick a needle in his arm. His eyes are bloodshot and dart around. His hair is tossed and missing in places. There are undeniable, sickening familiarity to him. He shouts the same things over and over. And it all comes back to me as I make out the words. I mouthed the words myself, the syllables feeling natural, even as I sobbed. I seemed to have misplaced my pills. Somebody help me. Help me. Please. Captain Azan stood in the viewing room, Professor Shaw beside him. His respiration was heavy, a light sweat misting his brow. Behind him stood a group of men, their faces half buried in shadow. Azan had no idea why he had been told to report to the facility. He did know one thing. Every man in the room was afraid. The air reeked of fear. Fear and desperation. Please bring him in, the professor spoke into the two-way monitor, his tie dangling like a hangman's noose. On the other side of the glass, a metal door hissed open, and two men, dressed head to toe in hazmat gear, dragged in a screaming man who they unceremoniously threw to the ground before beating a hasty retreat, the door locking in place behind them. Their captive immediately sprang to his feet, foam dripping from his lips as he continued to scream and hammer at the walls, tearing his fingernails and leaving trails of oozing blood. At last he noticed the two-way mirror and, howling, launched himself forward, his eyes wild as he smashed his head into the hardened glass, over and over again, leaving blood and bits of tattered scalp behind. Jesus, Azan gasped, taking a step backwards. What is it, some kind of rabies? Shaw ignored the question. Don't worry, Captain. He'll grow still soon. If my calculations are correct, his time's almost up. It was as if the professor's words had been some kind of prophecy. The raging man suddenly became still. His bloodshot eyes started to bulge, blood beginning to pour from his nose and ears. He let out an ear-piercing shriek of pain, his hands going to his bulging stomach as it suddenly began to grow and distend, tearing through the tattered remains of his blood-soaked clothes like some malignant pregnancy. Here it comes, Shaw said, his breath quickening. Steaming up the glass, beetles poured forth from the twitching corpse, cascading over and feeding upon his ruined flesh. The screeching man's stomach exploded in a welter of blood and gore as thousands of crimson beetles poured forth from the twitching corpse, cascading over him, feeding upon his ruined flesh. What the fuck? Azan gasped. What the hell is going on here? Shaw ignored him and spoke into the monitor once again. Begin the cleansing, please? Instantly, the overhead sprinklers shuddered to life. A spark was set and the entire room exploded into flames. The men behind Shaw began to mutter frantically, gesturing towards their clipboards and comparing notes. Turning towards Azan, Shaw gently took his arm and led him into a nearby conference room. Be seated, please, he said, turning on a nearby projector. The thing hummed to life, showing a petri dish filled with a coarse reddish-looking sand. This is a sample of Martian soil, Shaw began. Hold on a damn minute, Azan interrupted, shocked. How the hell did you get that? Shaw sighed, somewhat wearily. My dear Captain, this will take a long time to explain if you keep interrupting. A lot of what we do here is classified, and you and your men are on a need-to-know basis. All I can tell you, I shall, but if some things are left out of the conversation, it is because, let me guess. Azan smiled thinly. Classified. How astute you are, Captain. Now may I please continue? Sure will, Doc. Go on ahead. Shaw, somewhat mollified, continued. This sample has been with us for some time, but it's been held in stasis while we went about examining the other 4 samples. Azan was tempted to ask the obvious question, but decided against it. The professor was about as jumpy as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Besides, Azan had learned long ago that you could learn more by keeping silent than you could with a multitude of questions. The first samples gave us nothing, completely devoid of life. But the 5th sample must have contained something even our most advanced equipment couldn't have managed to locate. I now believe it was some kind of spore or parasite. I can assure you, Captain, he said, wiping a trembling hand on the side of his face, every precaution was taken, yet still, somehow, this thing managed to infect one of our scientists, one of our top people, in fact. David's death was a great loss, not only to us, but to all of humanity. David, Azan pushed gently. Yes, Shaw replied. Dr. David Peters. After examining the sample, he felt ill. Of course, this rang alarm bells, and he was immediately quarantined. He and most of his assistants, unfortunately, one of them managed to escape the base, but we'll discuss him in a moment. Poor David had collapsed, and he had a kind of sudden fever. He was only out for a few hours, but when he awoke, he was a madman. Wild, incredibly strong, as only a true maniac can be. But that wasn't the worst of it. He began to attack people, biting them, tearing at their flesh, swallowing it down. Finally, we managed to restrain him and get him locked away in a padded cell, but soon after it happened, the very same thing you saw today. Again, he hit the projector button, and another slide whirled into place, showing an insectoid-like creature flayed open and pinned to a white plastic board, surrounded by its own black viscous-looking blood. Azan wasn't quite sure what he was seeing. The thing, in some ways, looked arachnid in nature, but had a hard exoskeleton shell. It seemed more mouth than anything else, with large, piercing-like mandibles, and a multitude of small, black, shining eyes that were dotted around in random parts of its body. All he knew was that this thing was alien in nature, and unlike anything he had ever seen before. We managed to contain the first outbreak, Shaw said, never taking his eyes off the creature. What about the others? Azan broke in. Well, there's the rub. Shaw smiled sickly. Initially, 4 other members of staff were infected, all of those who assisted David that day. After we destroyed the second swarm that... He swallowed hard. Manifested from the second host. Things suddenly began to change. How so? Azan asked, leaning closer. The third victim, he said, checking his notes. One Christine Cumberland. Her gestation period took much longer. You could see the damn things straining to get out, but they wouldn't emerge. When at last they did, we killed them immediately, but the fourth victim took even longer. It was as if the damn things knew we were waiting for them, and when they finally did emerge, they didn't bother feeding on their host, but tried to scatter, scurrying up the walls, across the floor, ceiling, as if seeking a way out. Azan finished the sentence. Yes, just so. Shaw sighed, rubbing his temple. You think they have intelligence, don't you, Shaw? Yeah, the professor replied, sitting upright and adjusting his glasses. Yeah, I do. Can't be sure, but I'm beginning to believe it's some kind of hive mind. But there is more. And once again, he hit the projection button, and another slide slotted into place. It was the same creature, only now much bigger, with fewer legs and eyes. They keep changing with every brood. They seem to be adapting. The first one we caught and dissected. We couldn't make head nor tail of its anatomy. Completely alien. By the third hatching, the things had already developed a set of lungs, as if they were trying to adapt more fully to the atmosphere, to become more like us. Sweet Jesus, Azan said, dragging his eyes away from the creature on the screen. And you said one of these things, one of the hosts, managed to get off the base. Yes, before we knew of the infection, Shaw added quickly. And do you have him? Yes. It was the man you witnessed die in the other room. Thank God for that, Azan said, slumping in his chair. No, you misunderstood, Captain, Shaw replied. He managed to make it all the way home. And thankfully it's not very far, a small village just a few miles down the road, but the whole village is now quarantined. That's why you and your team have been brought here. You've been assigned to my command by the Ministry of Defense, and I shall be your liaison on the matter. From under his lab coat, he produced a sealed document. Azan took it and cracked it open, his mouth agape. You're gonna wipe it out, aren't you? The whole village. Not me, Captain. You. You and your men are going to exterminate every man, woman, and child in that place. And what if they're not infected? Azan shot back. Tell me, Captain. Is that a risk you're willing to take? Less than an hour later, Azan and the 2nd Battalion SAS were geared up and flying towards the village of Evershore. Professor Shaw sat beside him, looking a little green around the gills as the chopper was hit by strong autumn winds. 5 minutes later, Azan got his first look at Evershore. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. The entire village had been surrounded by steel makeshift walls, topped with vicious-looking razor wire. Hastily erected scaffold towers strategically placed around the wall looked down into the village. On the ground, regular army troops ran to and fro, and it seemed a whole sea of camouflaged tents filled a nearby field. Jesus, Azan turned to Shaw. All this in less than 48 hours. You have the full backing and might of the UK government behind us, Shaw yelled above the whirring rotors as the chopper touched down. Even in all his years in the SAS, Azan had never seen anything like this. Still, he had a job to do and leapt from the chopper, his men hot on his heels. He was immediately met by a grim-faced man. He wore no rank or insignia, but had the air of a military man all the same. Captain Azan, I presume, he said, offering up his hand. Azan took it. It was pumped hard once and then dropped. The other man never gave his name. Dr. Shaw, he said, nodding to the professor, who now stood by Azan's side. Please follow me, gentlemen. I'll give you a quick stirrup. The 2 men followed him into a nearby tent. I'm afraid it's like you suspected, the big man said to Shaw. The village is infected. Those little bastards were hiding inside those people all along. No sign of any aggressive behavior till we started putting up the walls. That's when they attacked. We managed to force them back using flamethrowers. Most of them seem to be at the Romero stage right now. The Romero stage? Azan asked. You know, the other man replied. Grade A Night of the Living Dead. It was a joke made up by my men. Guess it's their own way of relieving the tension. Besides, these fucking things act like zombies trying to eat people and all. So have you seen any signs of the beetles yet? Shaw asked. No, not yet, the grim-faced man replied. In fact, after the first attack, they retreated back into their homes. But they're up to something. I feel it in my bones. I don't understand this, Azan said, turning to Shaw. Why don't they just swarm and escape? Even with that wall in place, they could surely find a way out. I don't know, Shaw replied. We aren't even sure how the infection spreads. Maybe through a bite? Maybe the damn thing breathes out more spores. We have measures in place, the big man said, in case they do swarm. Did you notice the trench dug around the base of the wall? Can't say I did, Azan admitted, cursing himself. The whole thing had him shook up. Well, it's there, filled with a certain jelly somewhat akin to napalm. If one, just one of those things tries to get out, boom, whole fucking trench goes. And you think they know this? Azan asked. I don't know much about how smart these things are. That's down to the doc, he said, nodding to Shaw. Jesus Christ, Azan said, throwing up his arms. If we know fire kills these damn things, why don't we just send in a whole bunch of hellfire missiles? Blow the place off the face of the earth. Be kinda hard to cover that up, the man said. Right now, we're just about managing to keep it out of the press and offline. We have a cover story in place. But first, we gotta get rid of any evidence, and you and your team have been picked up for cleanup duty. So saddle up, Captain. You're going in. Azan had less than an hour to brief his men and get them geared up. The village was somewhat larger than Azan had first thought. Nestled in a small valley, it consisted of a main street with numerous other houses dotted on both sides of the gently sloping hills. Population at last census, just a little over 500 people. Azan and his crew, along with Doc Shaw, were airlifted in by helicopter, which landed on a nearby school playing field. He had a team of 20 elite men dressed head to toe in NBC gear, respirators and all. Half the squad carried compact but deadly flamethrowers across their backs, the rest an assortment of automatic rifles loaded with a mix of high explosive and full metal jacket tracer rounds. Okay, Azan said, as the heli dusted off. Radio check. Everybody copy. Each member of the squad answered affirmative, their voices sounding almost metallic in Azan's headset. Switching over to Channel 1, he addressed Shaw. Okay, Doc, he said, turning his face to the man. We're on Channel 1, which is a secure channel. The rest of the men are on Channel 2. High Command is on 3. I'll let you deal with them. You relay orders to me from Command, I give it over to them. Do you copy? Yes, I copy, Shaw replied. Please repeat standing orders and any changes of protocol, Azan continued. Shaw sighed. Standing orders are the same as before. Secure the town, wipe out all infected, which is, in this case, the entire town. Roger that, Shaw said, turning away. Quickly, he flicked over to Channel 2. Okay, boys, he addressed the men. This happy asshole says we have to wipe out everyone in this goddamn village. But that's not how we roll. The men murmured their agreement. So this is how we're going to play this thing. Anyone showing signs of infection or aggressive behavior, we put them down. Any other civilians, we round them up, take them to the extraction zone. After that, whatever these government assholes want to do with them's up to them. But I won't stain my hands or the regiment's reputation with innocent blood. We clear? The men all clicked their radios twice in acknowledgement. Okay then, Azan said, slinging his rifle. Let's move. The village was in shambles. It seemed every window was smashed, the pavement littered with glass that crunched under their booted feet. A few cars had been burnt out, ruined shells still smoldering in the growing wind. Looks like we missed the party, Captain, the man at Azan's side said. It was Azan's second-in-command, Sergeant Michaels, a big, tough man that Azan had served with many times before. Just then, another voice came over the comms. Got a body here, Captain. Azan quickly looked around and saw one of his men nearly in the entrance of a nearby lobby. Hold position, he said to the rest before hurrying across. Sweet Jesus, Azan sighed, seeing the state of the body, which was nothing more than a bloody skeleton and torn, tattered rags, the jaw hanging open as if in some kind of eternal scream. Azan turned to Shaw and signaled him across. What do you think, Doc? He said, switching to his channel. Completely devoured, Shaw replied, his voice dispassionate. Which means they're starting to swarm. We need to end this. End it real fast. Okay, Azan said, addressing the men. We're splitting up into 4 teams. Alpha team, take the west. Bravo, east. Charlie, south. Sergeant Michaels, myself, Trooper Kane, and the doc will check the north part of the village. I want a building-by-building search. Now move. The men quickly assembled themselves in 4-man teams and then hurried away. The attack came only a few moments later. Azan and his men had been searching a nearby post office on Main Street when Trooper Kane, who had been guarding the doorway, suddenly opened fire. Azan spun around, cocking his rifle, and ran for the door. From across the street, a horde of men, women, and children, their stomachs horribly distended, blood pouring from their eyes, ears, and mouths as they gnawed and chomped at the air. Every time one of them was hit, they would fall to the floor, their stomachs bursting open, thousands of beetles issuing forth, swarming towards the 4 men. Flamethrower! Azan screamed in the mic. Sergeant Michaels raced to the front, pushing Keen aside as he sprayed the oncoming horde with fiery liquid death. Nearby, Azan smashed out a window and began firing into the now-retreated horde, cutting them down so the flamethrower could continue its grisly work. At last, it was done. But now his comms were alive with the sound of panicked voices and the sporadic sound of gunfire. Soon those sounds turned to the screams of anguish and dread. And then, even more terrible, only the sound of a dead silence. Bravo team, report. Alpha, come in. Azan cried desperately into the mic, but there was nothing. Anyone, report. They're gone, Captain, Michaels said, shaking his head sadly. They're all gone. From the corner of his eye, Azan saw Shaw suddenly tear his respirator from his face as he began to laugh hysterically. Doc, Azan said, grabbing the man roughly by the shoulders. What the hell's wrong with you? No orders, I'm afraid, he said, tapping at his earpiece. Looks like your suggestion to High Command has been taken very seriously. They're going to wipe this place off the face of the earth. What? Azan gasped. Why? Isn't it obvious? Shaw spat at him. No longer any need for a cover-up. They must have had another outbreak somewhere else. Now this is about cleaning up their goddamn mess. Fuck. How long do we have? We need to get the hell out of here. Again, Shaw laughed. You don't get it. They won't let us out. They won't risk further infection. It's all about damage control. Suddenly, Shaw pulled his firearm. I won't go out like that. I'm not going to burn like one of these goddamn things out here. Shaw, no! Azan screamed, lunging for him, but it was already too late. Shaw put the gun to his head and pulled the trigger, spattering his brains all over the wall, his body hitting the floor like a sack of meat. Mother of God. What do we do now? Keen began to babble. Hazan ignored him and switched his radio to Channel 3. Come in, Command. This is Delta Team requesting extraction. I repeat, this is Delta Team requesting immediate extraction. But there was only static. Nothing. Hazan cursed, tearing the respirator from his face. Not a goddamn thing. So how do we get out? Keen said, his face white, his voice strained. With this, Michael said, not waiting for Hazan to reply. From his pack, he took out a block of C4 and a small detonator. Hazan began to smile. I don't remember telling you to bring explosives with you, Sergeant. He who dares wins, the sergeant said, returning Hazan's grin with one of his own. I think that school we just passed should give us plenty of cover from the assholes on the tower. We should prime it, lay it on the wall, boom, we're out of this shithole. All right, gentlemen, Hazan said, leaping to his feet. Grab your shit, we're leaving. Quickly, they made their way back to the school, encountering no infected as they hurried on. Once they got there, they scaled the fence, kept close to the side of the building. It was getting dark now, the shadows growing longer, giving them perfect cover as they turned a corner, the looming walls above them. Look, Keen said, pointing towards one of the skeletal-like towers. It's empty. They must have all left. Which means whatever's coming is coming soon. Work fast, Sergeant, Hazan replied. And just then, from behind them came a terrified scream. Hazan span around as the scream came again from the nearby window inside the school. Sounds like a kid, Keen said, licking his lips nervously. Yeah, Hazan said, yeah. Sergeant, give me that flamethrower. The hell are you talking about? The sergeant replied. You ain't thinking of going in there. No time for debate, Hazan snapped at him. Give me the flamethrower, Sergeant. That's an order. The sergeant did as he bid. Hazan quickly strapped it on. Blow that wall, Sergeant. Get the hell out of here. That said, he turned from the other man and boosted himself through the window, landing heavily inside. He was in a long corridor, classrooms on either side of him. Everywhere he looked, it seemed like strange shadows, scrawling and undulating across the walls, the air heavy with the scent of his own fear. He was just rounding a corner when one of the infected leapt from the shadows, spattering him with hot, diseased foam as it chomped and lunged for his throat. With a cry, Hazan managed to get an arm up under its chin, forcing the creature backwards. His free hand scrambled for his knife, which he drew from its sheath and thrust it again and again into the creature's side. Blood erupted from its mouth, spattering the inside of Hazan's neck and face. The hot smell of copper filled the air. With one last Herculean effort, he shoved the creature backwards, freeing himself from its terrible embrace before thrusting the knife deep into the howling creature's eye socket, obliterating the diseased mind within. Another scream rang out, this one even more desperate. Hazan, fighting off exhaustion, came on the run, checking each classroom frantically until at last he came upon her. A little girl sat huddled on top of a high metal cabinet, the floor around her swarming with crimson beetles. The girl saw him, her eyes widening in surprise, but Hazan ignored her and opened up on the squirming mass, screaming in fear and outrage as he burned the writhing horde. At last they lay still, and Hazan leapt across the dying flames, scooping up the little girl in his arms as he ran from the classroom and down the shadow-shrouded halls. Moments later there came an explosion, and Hazan smiled, knowing his men had escaped. They were at the window now, the terrified girl sobbing in his arms. Easy, easy, he said, helping her through the window and following after. He was just about to grab her up when the whole world exploded behind with a deafening roar. It scooped him up, a hot fist ramming into his back, throwing him forward through the hole in the wall and smashing him into the ground. There was a sudden pain like nothing he'd ever known, and he passed into oblivion. He awoke sometime later, covered in dust and bits of loose rubble, his skin tight and tender. He tried to sit up, but was only able to move his head from side to side. That's when he saw them. What was left of them, anyway. Trooper Keen and Sergeant Michaels, both of them no more than bloody skeletons, the flesh ripped from their bones. Only the tattered remains of their uniforms identifying who they had once been. And just then a face loomed above him. It was the girl, the little girl that he had rescued, seemingly untouched by the terrible explosion. She grinned down at him, her mouth growing impossibly wide, her eyes black and soulless. This world is ours now, she crooned, and Professor Shaw's words blazed across Hazan's mind. With every spawning, they change, adapt. It's like they're becoming more like us. So fresh, the thing above him tittered. This world, so full of life, so much to consume, so much to devour. She was changing now, beginning to writhe and twist until her entire body collapsed into 1,000 squirming beetles. They swarmed over Azan, tearing at his flesh as he howled into the night. A death cry that would signal the end of all civilization. Thomas Jones was enjoying his second cup of coffee that morning when the door to the work cabin was suddenly flung open and a fat, florid man by the name of Pendleton marched into the room. "What in all the blue blazes is going on here?" he said, casting a baleful eye at Thomas and the rest of his crew. "We're nearly a week over schedule. You bunch of happy assholes are sitting on your butts drinking coffee." "Now wait a damn minute," Thomas said, climbing to his feet. Thomas was a big man and loomed over Pendleton. Still, he felt small at the look of the righteous anger on the other man's face. "Maybe we could talk about this outside," he said, glancing around the room. It was obvious the other man was going to tear a strip out of him, but he'd rather not have it done in front of his crew. Pendleton smirked. "Sure, let's talk," he said, turning his back on him and strutting arrogantly from the room. "Asshole," someone muttered under their breath, but Thomas ignored them and followed after the other man, closing the door gently behind him. As soon as the door swung shut, he turned on him. "You want to tell me what the hell's going on here, Jones? This demolition job was supposed to be finished last week. Then I got a call from head office telling me to get my ass down to Cornwall. No explanation, just that things had come to a screeching halt with the job barely even started." Thomas took umbrage at that. Who the hell did this guy think he was, anyway, with his ill-fitting suit and superior attitude, coming down here and embarrassing Thomas in front of his crew? "Does it look like it's hardly begun?" he growled to the other man, widening his arms as if to encompass the entire street with its now empty plots. "We'd been busy busting our asses to hit your outrageous deadline, and everything was going according to plan until we came to that monstrosity," he said, pointing to the end of the street, at the old manor house that stood grimly overlooking the sea. Pendleton followed his gaze. "I don't see a problem," he smirked. "That place looks like a harsh wind could blow it down." Thomas sighed and rubbed his head, beginning to feel the first pulses of a migraine. "Look, it's hard to explain, so I'll just have to show you, okay?" Pendleton shrugged, uncertain now and not sure what the other man was getting at. Thomas took his silence for consent and walked a little ways down the street before jumping into a nearby dumpster and firing up the engine in a cloud of black diesel-smelling fumes. "Watch this!" Thomas yelled over the roar of the engines, driving slowly towards the old waiting mansion. Pendleton followed on foot, careful not to get any of the black smoke on his shiny suit. When Thomas came to the mansion, he did a skillful turn, so he was now facing the grounds. The hanging gates thrown open as if in some kind of dreadful welcome. "You ready?" he said, looking down at the other man. "What is this, show and tell?" Pendleton yelled back at him. "Just get the hell on with it, Jones. Time is money." Thomas nodded and drove slowly forward. As soon as the front tires hit the property boundary line, the dumpster's engine suddenly cut out. Thomas knew it was no good, turned the key, cranked the engine, but nothing. The big yellow dumpster ignition had just cranked over, but never catching until at last he gave up, throwing up his hands in frustration. "You see what I mean now?" he said, glaring down at Pendleton. "You just flooded the goddamn engine is all. Get down from there, let me try it. I was driving these things when you were still playing with your Tonka trucks." "Be my guest," Thomas said, jumping down and smirking as the fat man struggled to climb into the torn leather seat. "Okay, baby," Pendleton muttered. "Give it up for Daddy." He slowly pumped the gas before turning the key, but no matter how he cursed and cudgeled, the engine simply wouldn't catch. Now put the gear shift into reverse, Thomas called up to him. Try her again. You lost your fucking mind, Pendleton snapped. The engine's dead. Faulty equipment, that's all. Humor me. Thomas smiled up at him. Muttering, the other man did as he was bid, grinding the gears into reverse before turning the key. Immediately, the engine roared into life, and Pendleton let out a cry as he was flung backwards before slamming on the brakes. What the hell? Pendleton cursed angrily, slamming the gear forward. The big machine approached the house again in angry jerks, but as soon as the front wheels hit the threshold, the engine immediately cut out. Furious now, he grabbed for the gear stick again, but Thomas jumped aboard and covered the other man's hand with his own. It won't work, Pendleton, no matter how hard you try. Pendleton angrily shook free. Go get that JCB from across the street, he pointed. But Thomas shook his head wearily. We've already tried. We've tried with every machine we have. The result is always the same. Bullshit, Pendleton snapped. You're playing some kind of prank or silly game up here. You shitting me? Thomas snapped back, his own anger growing. You think I would risk the jobs of my men, hell, even my own job, by playing some stupid prank on a suit from corporate? You watch your tone with me, Jones, the fat man said, pushing him aside and laboriously climbing back down onto the street. Thomas followed, landing nimbly beside him. Fine, I won't waste my time trying to convince you then. The keys to everything we have are hanging up in the cabin. You go to town and report back when you're finished, Thomas said, strolling angrily away. This time it was Pendleton's time to follow. You're serious, aren't you? He said, laying a sweaty hand on Thomas's shoulder and gently turning him back around to face him. I ain't fucking with you, if that's what you're saying. No, nothing. I mean, nothing works. I have had every machine we have examined, checked for faults. They all run fine until we try to... You know, he said, looking towards the slumped house solemnly. How could that be? Pendleton replied, some of the anger fading as he followed the other man's gaze. Some say the old place is haunted, Thomas chuckled nervously. But Pendleton waved that away. Yeah, we all heard those old wives' tales about Lucas Vandraven and the missing people, blah, blah, blah. Bullshit. And how do you account for all this? Thomas said, his headache worsening. I don't know, Pendleton said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. Some kind of magnetic pulse, or maybe ley lines, or some kind of other crap, but I don't know. I do know one thing. Certainly ain't ghosts. In fact, he said, slowly walking away, I'm gonna go take a look inside, see if I can't figure this thing out. You coming? You are the foreman, after all. Thomas didn't really want to go. If he was being honest, he didn't like that old house. It had a feeling about it, like something was trying to weasel its way into your mind, stand in its shadow. It was akin to being buried alive. Still, he heard the challenge in the other man's voice. He didn't believe in ghosts and ghouls and wasn't about to let this corporate asshole show him up. Fine. Let's go take a look if that's what you really want. Together, the two men headed back down the street, their shadows growing long behind them. The Vandraven house stood as it had for almost 200 years, overlooking the dark waters of the Atlantic Ocean. It was a lonely place, abandoned and spurned by the locals of the village and surrounding areas who had grown up listening to the ghastly tales of Lucas Vandraven, who had murdered his wife and servants. But dark rituals and things left best unspoken, found in the spider-infested bowels of that old house. Not to mention the people from outside who had tried to renovate the old place. Many had gone missing or turned up dead. Madness, murder, and suicide had soaked into the very fabric of the Vandraven house, its dark legacy haunting the area with an unimaginable dread. So, what do you think? Thomas said, as they stood on the threshold. Looks like a real shithole, Pendleton replied, taking in the overgrown gardens and peeling paint. Those lions, he said, heading towards the entrance of the house before squatting down and tearing away the crawling ivy from the two statues. "That's some kind of coat of arms?" Thomas asked, almost going to his haunches, interested now despite his initial fear. "Looks like it," Pendleton replied, running his blunt fingers over the engraving, which was faint but still clearly showing a clipper ship riding atop a huge wave. Some kind of bird soaring overhead, a struggling fish caught up in its great talons. Chiseled underneath, in stark relief, was one word. Vandraven. "Charming," Pendleton muttered, standing and wiping the mud and leaves from his trouser leg. "All right, let's take a look inside." "I already tried that. The old place is locked, unless you want to crawl through that," he said, pointing to one of the many shattered windows where jagged glass shined wickedly in the fading light. "No need," Pendleton replied loftily. "I just so happen to have the key," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a large bunch of keys attached to a metal ring. "How the hell did you get those?" "When one buys a property, or in this case a whole street, one gets everything that comes with it, including the keys, not that they come cheap. The parish council asked an absurd amount for a place already half abandoned and falling into disrepair. The entire street was almost completely empty, and those who remained were easily bought off. Apparently they weren't fond of living too close to this old relic," he said, slapping one of the faded pillars. Thomas winced at that. Pendleton laughed at the look on his face. "Don't worry, Jones, it won't bite you," he said, slapping one meaty hand against the old house again, but suddenly he hissed in pain, the palm of his hand bleeding. "God damn it," he said, picking a piece of masonry from his hand. "Fucking place should have been condemned years ago." "Here," Thomas said, handing him a grease-stained bandana from his coverall pocket. "Thanks," the other man replied, looking for a clean spot before quickly wrapping up the still bleeding wound. "Look, maybe you should go clean that up. We can always come back tomorrow, and didn't I tell you, time is money, Jones," he said, selecting a large black pitted key and ramming it home into the lock. "Now let's go take a look before it gets too dark. I doubt very much the electricity's still on in this place." "Fine. Lead the way. Not sure what you're hoping to find, but it's your party." Pendleton ignored that, and together the two men stepped inside. The Vandraven house had once been a magnificent mansion built for his new bride. Lucas Vandraven had spared no expense. The once varnished floorboards had gleamed underfoot, illuminated by crystal chandeliers imported from Paris, France. The sturdy walls had been covered in fine, velvet-like wallpaper, and the house had been filled with all manner of antiques and wonders from Lucas's many travels abroad. But that had been many years ago. Now those same floorboards were warped and covered in grit and dust from the crumbling walls. The once massive chandelier that warmly illuminated the main entrance lay dark and broken, the many cracked crystals hanging like the fallen tears of those who had succumbed to the madness within. "Jesus," Pendleton said, wrinkling his nose. "The damn place stinks. The hell is that smell?" "Mold, damp, decay," Thomas replied. "We're probably taking years off our lives by breathing the damn place in." Still, he wasn't convinced. There was another smell that seemed to lay just beneath. A dark, rotting smell that seemed to stick to the inside of your nose and slime the back of your throat. "I can see why the locals think this place is haunted," Pendleton said, scraping his shiny shoe tip through the broken plaster and small pieces of splintered wood. "Look there," Thomas said, heading through a nearby hanging door into what looked like it must have been a study or a small library. "Look at this. Damn thing must be over 100 years old, maybe more," he said, running his hand over the desk's varnished sides. "Probably older," Pendleton said. "Surprised it hasn't been removed. Not in bad condition. Well, not compared to the rest of the house." "You think it belonged to him? This, Lucas Vandraven fella?" Pendleton shrugged. "Who cares? Come on, let's take a look around." Suddenly, there was a crash from upstairs, and a door slammed somewhere in the back of the house. Both men stared at each other. The air around them suddenly plummeted, becoming frigid, and Thomas was sure he could see Pendleton's breath just before the other man bolted, heading straight for the front door. Thomas hot on his heels. For a moment, Thomas was sure they would find the door shut and locked tight against them, but it was just as they left it, and both men bolted through, not stopping or slowing down until they reached the other side of the street. Both doubled over, breathing heavily. Oh, holy shit, what was that? Thomas gasped. Probably just the wind, Pendleton said. Either way, it scared the living hell out of me. You and me both. Thomas chuckled, feeling like a fool. Okay. Pendleton straightened. I don't give a shit if that place is haunted or not. It's coming down one way or another. I'm heading back to Manchester now tonight. I'll send you a crane with a wrecking ball attached. The damn thing won't even have a chance to get close to the property. We just extend the crane arms, swing away, and down that happy asshole comes. With the paperwork and everything. Should be with you in a few days at the most. All right, Thomas agreed. Sounds like a plan. Sure, the boys would like a few days off to go check out the local girls. Sleeping in a metal cabin on a cot bed and working around the clock has made them a bit testy. A few drinks and a lark will do some good. Pendleton waved that away. Whatever, Jones. Just make sure the equipment arrives and you and your boys are ready to go. I want this shit taken care of ASAP. Remember, time is money, Thomas cut in. Yeah, I got it. Then there should be no problems then, should there? Pendleton called over his shoulder as he walked away. Thomas said nothing. His eyes had returned to the Vandraven house as he realized once again he had been swallowed by its shadow. Thomas had left the rest of his crew to their debauchery and walked through the night-shrouded village. It was winter in Mavagesi, and the summer people had once again left the denizens of the village to their own devices. Turning his collar against the cold and damp, he noticed a flickering through a nearby pub window and smiled, peering through the window at the roaring fire inside. His frigid breath pluming against the glass, the place looked quiet and cozy. He looked up at the creaking sign that gently blew in the night breeze. The sign read, "The Lantern." Okay, he said. Just one more for the road, then off to bed. That said, he stepped inside, happy for the warmth and the fire's comforting glow, before sauntering over to the bar and ordering a pint and a whiskey chaser. Taking his drinks, he sat by the fire, wishing for the good old days when you could still smoke inside instead of having to freeze your butt off in the middle of the street like some fucking pariah. He had just taken the foam off his drink when a small, pudgy man with round John Lennon glasses appeared out of nowhere. He had a drink in one hand and what looked like a file stuffed with papers tucked firmly onto the other. Funny enough, the owlish-looking man seemed somewhat familiar to Thomas, but couldn't quite place him. When the man didn't speak, Thomas sighed, frustrated by the interruption. "Can I help you with something?" he said, trying to hide the annoyance from his voice. "As a matter of fact, you can," the man smiled, taking Thomas's words as an invitation to sit. "You're working up on Beach Road, I believe, clearing out those old houses up there." When Thomas didn't reply, he carried on excitedly. "Yes, you've torn them all down, but not the Vandraven house," he said, his voice dropping to a conspirator's whisper. "Seems like you're having some problems with that machinery of yours." Suddenly, Thomas could place the man. "You've been hanging around by the coastal path, haven't you, up by that old house?" The other man shrugged. "The public footpath. I'm not trespassing," he added quickly. "That's right, you ain't trespassing," Thomas repeated. "But spying on our progress, perhaps?" The other man laughed. "More like taking a vested interest. Look," he said, suddenly growing somber. "My name's Harry Unsworth, from the University of Falmouth. Let me buy you another drink. We can talk. Hell, I may even be able to help you figure out what's going on up there. I have become something of an expert on the Vandraven house over the years. Maybe give you a little history on the old place. It's cold outside. We have a nice roaring fire. One hell of a night for a ghost story. And no man likes to drink alone." Thomas smiled at this. Interested now, in spite of himself, Besides, the man had a certain open charm, and a free drink was a free drink after all. "Okay," he said, smiling. "Mine's a whiskey. A double, actually." A few moments later, Harry returned with the drinks, took off his jacket, and seated himself more comfortably across from Thomas, his coffee-stained file between them. "This," he said, tapping the file, "is years of research and history on the incidents and happenings that have taken place inside that house. The last case being less than 5 years ago. And a bunch of bloggers went up there and tried to stay the night. They had a YouTube channel, all ghost seekers. 2 of them were found dead inside. The other one burned up on the front lawn. Now, the local police called it a murder-suicide, slammed the case closed, just like they do every time the Vandraven house takes another victim." Thomas took a long drink, then nervously wiped at his mouth. "Talk like the damn place is alive or something." Unsworth shrugged. "Maybe it is." "What is it you said you do again at the university of yours?" Thomas said, not liking the other man's reply. Unsworth laughed. "I'm a history teacher. You could say parapsychology is a sideline of mine. No, I'm not crazy. That house has a checkered past. Here," he said, not waiting for a reply, but opening his file. "The house was first built by Lucas Vandraven in 1836, on the hilltop overlooking the village. There was some controversy over the location, as a certain set of stone rings, going all the way back into antiquity, had been uprooted and the stone used in the very foundation of the house. Then there were the 2 men killed whilst the house was under construction. One fell from scaffolding, another crushed by falling masonry. Lucas paid off the grieving widows, moved right in with his wife Elizabeth, her maid Matilda, and Lucas's manservant Stevens. By November of the next year, all were found dead, except Lucas, who threw himself from the cliffside. Rumor has it, he was found with some abomination that still clung to him, even in death. There was also talk of dark rituals, obscene rites that were held to some infernal god in the dark bowels of that place." "Jesus," Thomas replied, taking a long, hard pull from his pint and wishing desperately for a cigarette. "That's only the tip of the iceberg," Unsworth continued eagerly. "The house lay abandoned for nearly 70 years until a retired shipbuilder from Manchester moved in with his dreams of renovations. He was found sometime later, hanging from the rafters of what had once been Lucas Vandraven's study. Now it was the turn of the Jonas family, who went missing, their belongings still inside, but the family itself gone, just like that." He snapped his fingers for emphasis. 30 years later, the Dorchesters found in the basement, their bodies found torn, twisted, as if by some terrible force. For a time, the house lay empty, holding its dark secrets until 2010, when the Maloneys moved in. A husband and wife, 2 little girls. The father was found in the basement, his family chopped to little pieces, scattered around him. The local constable that went to investigate was later found hanging from the ceiling beams in an upstairs bedroom. Then there was the 2 town drunks who tried to break into Lucas Vandraven's tomb, perhaps looking for treasure. One was never seen again, the other, a raving lunatic. I could go on. "Please don't," Thomas said, holding up a restraining hand, which seemed to tremble ever so slightly. "I get the point. I could see why many believe the place is cursed, or haunted. But I'm a practical kind of guy, and I just don't believe in ghosts and ghoulies." "What?" the other man asked, incredulously. "How do you explain all the mysterious deaths and your machines? The hell do you think's going on in there?" Thomas shrugged, growing tired of the whole thing. "I have no idea. But I doubt very much the ghost of Lucas Vandraven is fucking with me and my fuel lines." Unsworth didn't reply, but finished up his drink before leaning against the table towards the other man. "In a way, it's good you don't believe. I have to admit, I didn't run into you tonight by chance. I have, shall we say, a proposition for you." "Sorry?" Thomas smirked. "But, you're not my type." Unsworth ignored that. "I want to go into that house. I have certain equipment with me. I want to go inside only briefly, you understand? Just to take a few readings and perhaps do a little recording. Thomas's eyes narrowed. So, that's it. You want me to get you inside, and why would you want to go in there? You so obviously believe the place is cursed or haunted or whatever the hell it is. You believe. So why? Why would you want to go in there? Because, Unsworth replied, just happy that Thomas hadn't walked out on him yet. Because if I can prove it, if I can get a good reading or catch something on camera, I can finally get the university to take me seriously. Maybe even give me funding to study the paranormal right there, on campus. Well, I hate to rain on your parade, Thomas said, starting to stand, but I ain't going to be helping you break into that old house. It's more than my job is worth. £1,000, cash, Hemsworth said, slapping a stuffed envelope onto the table between them. £1,000 right now, just for 10 minutes, to just take a walk around and take a couple of readings. Thomas slowly sat back down. You're crazy, he said, eyeing the stuffed envelope. Look, Unsworth said, your crew are all down here pissing it up, chasing the village girls, and locals don't go anywhere near the place. Nobody will see us, and you're up $1,000, tax-free, for 10 minutes of your time. Seeing Thomas needed a little more convincing, he reached into his pocket again and slapped another stuffed envelope on the table. It's another $1,000. Don't ask for more. I'm tapped out. Jesus, you're crazy, Thomas said. Still, he reached across the table and stuffed both envelopes quickly into his jacket pocket. 10 minutes, he said as both men climbed to their feet. You have 10 minutes, and you're done. Sure, Unsworth said, scrambling into his jacket. And don't worry. What could possibly go wrong? It had taken Unsworth 10 minutes to nip back into his B&B and gather up his equipment. After that, both men had headed up the hill, neither talking much. Thomas smoking one cigarette after another. He knew he was doing a stupid thing, but $2,000 was $2,000, and the chances of being caught inside was little to none. Still, he didn't cherish the thought of going back into that old place, especially after the horror story he had been subjected to. Even if you didn't believe in all that supernatural crap, it was enough to give you the goddamn heebie-jeebies. However, it wasn't every day you got to earn $2,000 for 10 minutes. He was dragged out of his own pondering by an excited squeal from Unsworth, and looked up surprised to see that they had already arrived. Okay, Unsworth said, quickly crossing the road and unzipping his jacket, revealing an expensive-looking camera that hung around his neck. Just a quick snap from the outside, and we can head on in. Thomas looked nervously about as the camera's flash cut through the surrounding darkness. Hurry the hell up, will ya? He hissed. Okay, let's go, Unsworth said, trotting back against the street, his camera banging hollowly against his chest. The hell am I doing? Thomas muttered under his breath as he led the way, pushing past the rust-covered gates into the Vandraven grounds, the smaller man hot on his heels. Suddenly, he was blinded by another flash as Unsworth snapped another photo of the crumbling lions that proudly held the coat of arms of Vandraven. Cut that shit out! He angrily rounded on the other man. You take one more fucking picture before we can get inside, and the whole goddamn thing is off. Sure thing, Unsworth said, quickly stuffing his camera away. Still, he buzzed with an excited energy that set Thomas's teeth on edge. Okay, Thomas said. We're going in through the back door. The thing is all rotted out. It should only take a quick shove and we're in. After that, you got 10 minutes, not a second longer. Understood? The other man nodded eagerly. Let's go. The back of the Vandraven house was much like the front, overgrown with clingy ivy. The once marble flagstaffs covered with centuries of fallen leaves. The wind whistled through the rotting eaves, and long-dead trees creaked and groaned in the stark winter winds, as if horrified to be trapped in such a hellish landscape. From behind them came a sudden loud boom, and both men spun around, their hearts beating hard in their chests, but it was only the lid of an old coal bin banging up and down in the growing wind. Jesus, Unsworth laughed nervously. This place is one crazy creep show. You could say that again, Thomas replied. his wet tongue sliding over his dry lips. "You sure you want to go in there?" "Yes," Unsworth replied. "You're goddamn right I do. I've been waiting for something like this all my life. I wouldn't be stopped now just because of a stiff breeze." The little man's courage bolstered some of Thomas's own. "All right then, let's get it done," he said, approaching the sagging back door and laying his shoulder against it gently, before pushing hard with his legs. Immediately, the rotting door gave way. Thomas let out a cry of alarm. Unsworth's quick reaction stopped him from taking a nasty fall as the other man grabbed a handful of his jacket. "Thanks," Thomas said. "That was easier than expected. I guess the house wants us to come in." The comment was supposed to be a throwaway remark. Yet it hung heavily between the two men until Unsworth took a flashlight from the inside of his jacket and gently pushed past, illuminating the interior within. They were standing in a large kitchen, or what was left of one at least. In the middle of the room sat a large wooden chopping block, splintered and gouged. Attached to a nearby wall was a large rusting sink, from which fat droplets of filth-colored water dripped onto its chipped, sagging surface. Broken tiles crunched beneath their feet, and shelves with old, bulging, rusty tins cast deranged shadows across the peeling walls. Thomas swallowed hard and glanced at his watch. 10 minutes. 10 minutes and we're out of here. Unsworth didn't answer but moved more fully into the room, snapping the occasional picture, his flashlight illuminating the decay in stark relief. When he was done, he pushed through the sagging door and into a long hallway. Thomas stayed close behind him. "It's cold," Unsworth muttered. "You feel that?" He sat over his shoulder. "Yeah," Thomas replied. "What do you expect? It's the middle of winter." Unsworth didn't reply, but took a thermometer from a small bag he was carrying and quickly recorded the temperature. "We need to go that way," he said, pointing to the end of the hall. "That's Lucas Vandraven's study. If anything's going to happen, it will be in there." "I doubt it," Thomas sighed. Still, he was eager to leave the place. There was something in the air, a kind of watchfulness. He quickly glanced at his watch. 8 minutes. Unsworth turned and continued down the hall, his flashlight cutting through the waiting darkness until at last they reached the study room. With its ornate desk and rotting books that perfumed the air with the smell of rot and mildew, Unsworth stepped inside. Thomas was about to follow when a sudden hiss came from behind. With a cry, he swung around, flashlight trembling. Just then, the door between the men slammed shut. From the other side came a cry of alarm as Unsworth pounded on the door, frantically trying to get out. Thomas stood there frozen as a naked woman stepped out of the darkness. 2 knitting needles sticking obscenely from her throat, blood oozing down her body. In her outstretched arms, she carried some kind of obscene creature that mewled and thrashed as if in terrible pain, its own rancid blood running down her arms. Through bloody teeth, she grinned at him. "Oh, Lucas," she crooned. "Oh, Lucas, what have you done? What have you done to our son?" With an angry hiss, she flung the abomination at him, and with a cry, he threw up his arms, staggering backwards, landing heavily against the front door with a screech of fear. He tried to beat the creature away, but there was nothing there. The woman had completely vanished, and the house was deathly silent. Quickly, he scrambled to his feet. Remembering Unsworth, he grabbed for the study door, which opened easily to his touch. What he saw there almost broke his mind, and he took a step away, whimpering. Unsworth lay across the large ornate desk. 2 old-fashioned quill pens had been driven into his eyes, and his throat was a bloody ruin. From beside his body, a little girl's face suddenly appeared. She grinned at him slyly from her bloody mouth. "Hey, mister," she giggled. "You seen my sissy? She's around here someplace." A cold hand suddenly fell against his shoulder, and with a scream he turned and looked into the rotting face of Lucas Vandraven. In his terror, he forgot the little girl and staggered back into the room. "You should not have come," Lucas groaned, maggots squirming in his hair.
This place is damned. We are damned. We're trapped here. This place feeds upon our souls. It'll feed upon you too. You will spend an eternity of torment trapped in this place.
No! Lucas cried, swinging his arms at the rotting corpse, but his hand passed through the thin air, and he ran, heading for the front door, but of course, finding it locked.
This way, lover,
a voice called from down the hall. A pale, bloody arm broke through the darkness, beckoning to him. The nails cracked and bloody. With a cry, he headed up the old winding staircase, desperate to escape the madness below. His mind started to fracture as the house came alive all around him. He could hear screams and gibbering. Faces appeared out of the darkness, their faces infused with torment and terror. With a cry, he flung himself into the first room he came to and slammed the door closed behind him. Inside, there was nothing but an old, rusting cot and a large, ornate wardrobe that now creaked open.
It won't do any good to run away.
A child's voice seeped from within.
I hid right here. Right here, and Daddy found me. Always.
The door slowly creaked open, and a dead boy staggered out. His eyes rolled white, his skin slate gray. A large carving knife jutted from his chest. His bloody Thomas the Tank Engine pajamas clung to his wasted body as he slouched his way towards Thomas.
You should stay a while,
he giggled.
It's so beautifully dark here.
The door he had escaped through was shaking now, and he could hear screams of anguish as dark, rotting blood seeped towards him. With a scream of madness, he flung himself against the room and hit the boarded-up window, which instantly gave under his weight, and blessingly, he was falling. Splinters of wood and shards of glass all about him. As he turned and twisted in midair, he didn't see the rusting fence spikes that burst through his back and chest, impaling him like a bug on a needle. The last thing Thomas Jones saw, as the light faded from his eyes, it was a multitude of faces. The windows of the house were filled with them, their hungry, grasping hands beckoning him to join them. Inside the Vandraven house, time did not stand still. It twisted and undulated. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallways, a scream of despair, followed by breaking glass drifted from the kitchen. Somewhere in the bowels of the house, a child cried out in fear, and a woman's moans and sighs drifted down the peeling halls. In the parlor, a grandfather clock chimed softly, as it had done for many years, and would continue to do so for many more. And for now, the evil inside slept, and the house waited, and waited, and waited. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I want to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video if you're watching on YouTube. Thank you so much for listening to tonight's podcast if you're listening on Spotify, and thank you guys for doing that thing where you subscribe, where you hit the bell, where you hit like, or you leave a little comment at the bottom or wherever you can leave comments at. I don't know, I don't use Spotify that much. And finally, I want to give a huge thank you to everybody who supports me on Patreon. This past year has been rough. I've been gone for quite a while trying to get things organized for my own life, and Patreon subscribers, you guys who subscribe everywhere, this has kept me afloat in turbulent waters. So I want to give a very special thank you to Jordan Humble, Diana Kraus, Disciple, Strategy Wolf Emoji, SullyMan, Brandon Mendoza, BrimstonePandemonium, Caltuna, William Wellington, Scruffy the Janitor, Brenna Crow, LaQueda Canizales, Smiley the Psychotic, Djenna, Dante Kinkade, SimbasBloodyMojo, Mephistopheles, CursepoxPrimarch, M, Jesus Cornejo, Yarghoul, Verbal Horror, Amber Clark, Jay Kearns, Mike, Himbo Jerry, Crusader Chocobo, Corbin Dallas, Estebean, Seclude, Salty Surprise, Red Shadowcat, Turtleman, Cryolinian, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Dirt Diver 030, Voice of Sand, Psychomel, Melted Lake, Tali Sue, William King, Sashi Suzaku, Croconut 509, Stricken, Freddy Krueger, Hades Nephew, Acid System, Sky Harbor, Nico Kyle, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Polson, and Corey Kenshin. I really appreciate your support, and I cannot thank you enough.